2020 at 7:02 p.m. This meeting is being held remotely as an alternate means of public access pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, temporarily amending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. And is anyone else recording the meeting this evening? Okay, seeing no one. Next, are there comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda? Okay. Then we get to our first order of business tonight, which is a reserve fund transfer request, which is related to Straits Pond. I forwarded to AdCom yesterday the reserve fund transfer request paperwork and a memo to explain the request. And we have Emily Sullivan, the town's conservation officer, here with the transfer request for $21,148 for repairs to the tidal gates at Straits Pond. So Emily, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. So just to give you a little bit of background on Straits Pond. So Straits Pond is a pond that borders Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset. It's part of the Weir River estuary. And in 2007, the Straits Pond Technical Advisory Committee was formed with representatives from Hingham, Hull, Cohasset, and then several state and federal agencies. The Technical Advisory Committee, they oversee the operations, management, and then potential improvement to Straits Pond. The advisory committee was formed, or the Technical Advisory Committee was formed in 2007 when the tidal gate was upgraded from a manual tidal gate to an automated tidal gate. And then at that time, the communities discussed financial contributions from the three municipalities for maintenance and operation and improvement or repair of the tidal gate. So historically, Hingham has contributed funding on an as-needed basis. The breakout of the municipality's contribution is that Hull contributes 50% of the cost, Hingham contributes 25% of the cost, and then Cohasset contributes the additional 25% for the total cost of what's needed to be done for the tidal gate. In 2001, Hingham contributed $5,000, and that was for the operations of the tidal gate, as well as the upgrade of sensors that help with the tidal gate operating. This past year, the tidal gate has actually broke. And so there have been repairs that have been made to the tidal gate to resume its automated function. There's also been a sediment survey conducted because there's sedimentation in Straits Pond, which is affecting the tidal gate's ability to completely flush out or to flush the tide with flush the gate with the tide cycle. And so this year, Hull has asked Hingham to contribute its 25%, which is significantly more than what Hingham has paid in the past. And so this year, Hingham is being asked to contribute $21,148, which is unexpected, and therefore we didn't have the funds budgeted for the expense.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Emily about this request? Brenda?
I'm truthfully just curious to understand how the division of costs got made. What was the basis of that?
So that's a great question. And unfortunately, I don't know the answer. I believe that was decided when the Technical Advisory Committee was formed in 2007 by what I assume would be the town's leadership, all the municipal leadership at that time.
Okay. Thank you. I always appreciate things that teach me new words like bathymetry. But I appreciate, would you also just explain what does the tidal gate do to those of us
Yeah.
that have never seen it?
Sure. So, and it's I guess the best way to describe where the tidal gate is, it's by kind of Victoria's sub shop, if you're familiar with that as you go towards Hull. But so the tidal gate is used to help with the flushing of the pond, essentially. So opening and closing it with the tide. So it helps maintain the healthiest ecosystem that it can be. Right now, there, like I mentioned, there is some sedimentation. And so that's mostly from like stormwater runoff and things that's kind of impeding the tidal gate's ability to flush out water, sediment, contamination that's in the pond back out towards Hingham Bay.
Thank you.
Emily, did you go before the select board earlier tonight with this request?
I did.
Okay, so the select board voted unanimously.
Correct. Yes. In favor of the transfer.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Does anyone else have any questions about this request? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So could I have a motion to make for this reserve fund transfer?
Move to approve the requested reserve fund transfer.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? If not, we come to vote. Bob,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Steveline,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Al,
Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye. Aye.
Caitlin.
Aye.
Okay, and Sarah's not here yet. So I've got 12.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for coming tonight, Emily.
Thank you.
And Sue, I guess I send you an email to show the vote and that's going to be enough.
Yes, yes, I already got I'll get the Board of Selectmen's, and Emily, it will be in the account next week.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time tonight.
All right. Okay, so the next item of business is warrant article hearings and votes. So we have first Article EE, foster school funds for pre-construction costs. And we have some members of the school building committee with us tonight. I see Linda Hill.
Julie, I just called Ray. He's coming on in 2 minutes and he has the slides for the presentation. So
Okay.
if you could just give us 2 minutes, he'll be right there.
Okay.
Thank
Do you
you.
want to do a little song and dance for us, or give us
hi,
give us a little preamble if you'd like?
Sure. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Linda Hill. I'm chair of the school building committee. We had a long meeting last night till about 10:30. We have been working hard probably for the past 6 or 7 months with our architect, Raymond Designs, Jean Raymond, and our consultants, who are project manager, which is PMA Consultants, Chris Carroll. We have presented our initial schematic designs to a feasibility subcommittee of the MSBA a couple weeks ago, and that went really well and preliminarily got their okay to continue on. We will be going to the full board August or in September. I don't know the exact date for their final approval. So what we're gonna have a little presentation that will go into detail of, it'll give you pictures of the design to date, the site plan, how we're gonna prepare the site. But what we're coming for this article tonight is interim funding to get us from probably April through end of October when we would have probably a special town meeting for full funding. So this article is just interim funding to get to the point where the MSBA will take their final board vote and then we would move forward. The reason, I don't know if everybody knows that we're doing it that way, is because we're on a strict schedule because we would really like to have the school open by September of 2024. And in order to do that, we are at a time frame where we need to, before the board votes, even though we've gotten preliminary go-ahead from them, we need to get our final design development plans ready. So as soon as they do vote, we can go out to bid with contractors. So by doing the interim funding, it gets us to that point where we don't have to stop where we are and stop our momentum and then start up again in the fall. So that's a quick overview besides the slide presentation, which
It's coming.
yeah. Oh, he thought it was at 7:30. So I'm trying to think what else I could share with you. The designer has met multiple times with staff at the school because they have been integral in developing the layout of the classrooms and the learning spaces, as well as the layout of the outdoor space for playtime. And that has been very important. We have been proceeding with the idea of the net zero for the development of the school. So a large part of our meeting last night was going over various different HVAC systems that were all net zero. And that was quite interesting. It's like going to your mechanic and having them explain everything to you and saying, yes, I understand. But we will, within 2 weeks at our next meeting, we will probably have to decide on which option we're going to go with. One of them was geothermal versus having units on the top of the school, and we'll be doing analysis as to cost and lifespan and all of that kind of interesting stuff. Trying to think what else I could fill you in on.
Bob has his hand raised, so do you want to ask a question right now, Bob?
Julie, I actually would suggest, I mean, we had a discussion about various things this afternoon, that this might be an appropriate time for you to share the breaking news on the warrant article that is going to be withdrawn. Because it's, I'm seeing it as kind of like one of those games where you move a piece and then you have to move all the other pieces, and that those pieces are important for our discussion of the next two articles.
Okay, well, so I can skip up to what I was going to talk about in the warrant process update, which is that tonight the select board, well, so there's two things. There's two new articles, and then 2 articles have been withdrawn. So I guess I'll start with the 2 articles that have been withdrawn or are in the process of being withdrawn from the warrant. And they are that the Harbor Wharf walls, which would have appropriated more funds for work on the town pier wharf walls, have come up with some permitting issues with the state. And because of that, the project has to be put on pause for the time being. So that article is being pulled.
Julie, that's
And
12 to 18 months, just to clarify. They think it's going to be 12 to 18 months based on the permitting snafu.
Yeah, long pause.
Long pause.
Yeah.
Like I won't
which
be here
is-
anymore.
Don't hold your breath.
Which is
Exactly.
really too bad, but it is significant in a way, as you say, Bob, because that project was going to be a debt exclusion, which would have joined another project, the South Shore Country Club, on the debt exclusion. So they would be joined they would be together on the ballot if town meeting passed it. And so that project is not going to go to town meeting. The other one is 32 Rockwood Road, which is a parcel of land that was to be transferred by the town to the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust to turn into housing. And the land failed a perk test. And Kristen, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but basically it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's all they talked about last night, saying that it was just unfortunate that it failed and that there's nothing they can do with the piece of land at this point, so they wouldn't go forward with it.
Okay. Okay, so those are being withdrawn, and tonight the select board has on its agenda to open the warrant for annual town meeting for the submission of 2 new articles, which would enact some of the recommendations made by the Sustainable Budget Task Force. The first one is they're calling Article GG, which is the real estate transfer fee. And Kristen has graciously accepted this article to work on, and town meeting would authorize the town to petition the state legislature to allow the creation of a transfer tax in Hingham on certain types of real estate transactions, the details of which are being worked out, and the select board is hearing that article tonight. The other article they're calling HH, which I like to call Sue's article, because Sue has come up with the idea to reallocate borrowed but unspent funds for completed capital projects, which is a wordy way of saying that from years ago, we had some school projects that had borrowed funds, but they came in under budget. So those excess funds, the article would redirect those leftover funds, and they need to be redirected to another capital project, which I believe will be earmarked for the Plymouth River School windows project, Sue. And the amount is about $1.1 million.
Yes, we picked the Plymouth River windows only because it's already been approved by town meeting. So since it hasn't started yet and we already have the money and the approval, that's where we want it to go to.
We've
And
been
it's-
working on that project as well as part of our committee, and we've been working with the designer, and they should start that work this summer.
Great, perfect timing.
Once that article is approved, then it will go right into the Plymouth River School Windows Capital Project.
Once the
So-
appropriate funding source is fixed.
Yeah, so
Yes.
the initial borrowing will be quite a bit less.
Good work, Sue.
So, so those would be 2 new articles that we're going to tackle, and George is going to work on the capital reallocation project. Bob, you have a question?
No, I appreciate your giving us this advanced information, because I think, for example, as you have kind of mentioned, that with respect to the pool article, that would now become the only excluded debt article that would go to a ballot vote this year with respect to the annual town meeting. And I think that, once Ray has made his presentation, I'll have some further thoughts. But I think that perhaps over the school break, we might want to give some further thought and consideration to the allocation of funding sources for the various projects in view of this kind of late breaking news.
Well, we can talk about it when we take up the pool article, but
Yep.
that's been discussed and there's no change in that plan right now. So, but I see that Ray is on our call or our meeting now. Hi, Ray.
Yeah, hi, I apologize. I had it in my head. This was 7:30 start. My bad.
That's
Right.
back to the pre-COVID days when we met in person and we waited for people to commute back from the big city, and
Exactly.
yeah, so.
Sorry about that.
Ray, I made you co-host so you can share your screen at any time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
And apologies to Linda. Thanks for giving the update. Obviously, as she said, we've been doing a lot, keeping a lot of balls in the air, meeting late at night as you have as well. So let me see if I can share. I got 2 screens going, so see if I can do this the right way. I think I'm choosing the correct screen.
That looks perfect on our end,
Looks
Ray.
good.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, so you can see my screen. I got it on my second screen, so what I see on my first screen is not, but as long as you can see it, great. So thanks for the opportunity. As Linda said, we've been hard at work, burning the midnight oil and trying to keep to a very aggressive schedule for this project, because we are very sensitive to the fact that this is the third time as a charm with the MSBA. There were 2 times where we submitted SOIs, or the school committee submitted SOIs that were unsuccessful and not chosen. And the foster community has had to kind of hang in there with us. Many of whom have moved on to the middle school, many of whom have gone on to private schools. But we certainly have a robust and engaged foster community who is interested in what we're working on. So we're happy to share that with you tonight. So what you see is in the first slide, and I'll try to run through these slides very quickly. This is going to be pretty much a 30,000 foot view of where we are, because where we are is essentially the end of conceptual design and at the beginning of schematic design. And once we finish schematic design, probably the end of April, that is what will be submitted to the MSBA for their approval at their meeting at the end of August. And that will be the definitive decision and the number that will inform the warrant article that we will plan to put forth for the special town meeting in the fall. So what you're looking at is, we like to call these, or Gene Raymond, our architect, likes to call these cartoons, because they're really not based on anything in detail yet, but just conceptual on paper. But this is what the school might look like, representative of some materials that look like natural materials, like wood, like copper. It's going to be set into the hillside. Let's talk about the schedule just briefly. So I'm going to assume that the members of advisory have kind of caught up with where we've been on this project, and the fact that this committee was formed in 2017. There was feasibility money, and we've begun to do some work even before the MSBA invitation in 2019. And over the past 2 years plus, we've worked hand in hand with the MSBA in kind of moving the ball forward a little bit. We've engaged an owner's project manager. We've engaged an architect, both of whom have ties to Hingham or live in Hingham. And we went through the feasibility phase, which just ended, and essentially confirmed that we can develop this site, and then started to evaluate the various options that were available to develop this site. And through that process, we studied 10 different options. And what we chose was the construction of a new school, as we will talk about in a few minutes. In terms of schedule, where we are now is working through schematic design over the next 2.5 months, at the end of April. Then we'll be submitting our schematic design package to cost estimators, I think by the end of March, in order to get a number on that. And then what we're talking about for purposes of this warrant article is essentially interim funding. So in the ordinary sequence of things, we would be seeking MSBA board approval prior to a town meeting approval of an appropriation. And that's still going to be in the same sequence, but because of the way the MSBA board meetings fall and the schedule this year, and because of the fact that we cannot get MSBA approval of our of the overall project before July 1st of this year. And that was set a couple of years ago. So we knew that. And because of the way the board meetings fall, we're not going to get that approval before August 31st. So because we'll finish schematic design by the end of April, we were then faced with a situation where we're going to have 4 months of just sitting and doing nothing. And that delay of 4 months was essentially going to cost us pretty much a full year in being able to open and occupy a school. So what we talked about in committee, and we believe that we have convinced the MSBA, and they're reasonably comfortable with, that we will continue to work on design development and preparation of an early bid package for site work that will begin in December. And that funding that we need for that period that goes beyond schematic design that's covered through the feasibility money that we already have appropriated will need to be covered somehow in the event that the MSBA does not approve the project on August 31st. Last night, I think we had a school building committee meeting, and I think Gene Raymond, our architect, could be quoted as saying that there's zero chance that the MSBA will not approve our project on August 31st. So we feel highly confident that we're going to get approval of what we submit to them in terms of schematic design on August 31st. But the reality is we don't have that approval yet. So in order to continue working, in the unlikely event that we don't get that MSBA board approval in August, we need to be able to show that we can cover the funding of project manager work, and more importantly, or more significantly, architectural design work, and the costs associated with both of those. That will essentially take us from the end of April until the end of October. So if you look at this schedule, you can see that is, I'll actually skip to the end. That is represented by the May through October period here. And the number for the warrant article that we're proposing is 3,128,912. And that will cover design development, construction documents, and an early bid package for site work that will get us through to the fall, where the full appropriation at special town meeting will take effect. And this number will be folded into the overall number that gets approved by the MSBA upon submission of the schematic design set, and will be submitted to town meeting in the fall for approval. So the only possibility that we would be on the hook for this amount separate from the full appropriation is if the MSBA does not approve our submission at the end of August, which we think is a zero chance.
Right, and I think you might have mentioned, but I did mention, I think it's important that everybody knows that we did go in front of a subcommittee about 2 weeks ago with our schematic designs, and did not get any pullback from them, and basically got the go-ahead to continue working on the project. And they wouldn't do that if they weren't confident that it would go through the full board eventually.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We had the key meeting was February 2nd before the facilities assessment subcommittee of the MSBA. And they essentially reviewed all of the submissions that we've given them to date, including the education plan, the conceptual plans that we've given them thus far. There was a lot of comments back and forth. I know members of advisory were privy to some of those, and we believe we satisfied the MSBA sufficiently so that they're in the process of drafting a recommendation to the full board that will actually occur on March 2nd, I believe, where they'll recommend moving forward with this project. So if there was going to be any real concern, any any indication that we were not going to get approval, they would have told us then. They would not let us spin our wheels and waste our time and money continuing to work on something that they weren't going to approve. So we feel fully confident that we're going to get that approval first on March 2nd and then later on August 31st. So just quickly on the schedule, as I mentioned, special town meeting in the fall will address the full appropriation for the construction project. And then we will have already, this school project is a little bit different than others that we've undertaken because we're trying to keep to an aggressive schedule. So we split up the work into two different packages. Because this site involves land that will at some point in the next 50 years, perhaps be subject to rising tides and floodplain issues, the design requires that we raise essentially most of the site up to a particular floodplain level that was dictated by the Kleinfelder report that some of you may be familiar with from 2015, and then subsequent reports that the Climate Action Study Committee has done in conjunction with, all of the other research that we've done independently with respect to what's going to be happening. And of those of you who read the Globe, you saw an article this week about the rising tides and what needs to be done. So we've taken all of that into account in this design. And what we're doing is splitting the process up into two phases so that the first phase will be essentially site work to prepare the site in order to build. And that will be digging into the hillside adjacent to the north, using that fill to raise up a plateau, if you will, to build on that will take us out of the floodplain. That's the first phase. We will then go to bid again in the spring for the main vertical construction phase for the building. And that construction will start in late spring. And the plan is to open a school and occupy it in the fall of 24. That summer, once the new building is substantially complete, the old building will be demolished, similar to the process that we went through with the middle school about 10 years or so ago. So that's on schedule. Just real quickly, in the process that we've gone through to kind of inform the design at the point we're at, it takes into account not only the physical building and the spaces that will be occupied, but also the curriculum that's going to be delivered in that space, right? So we're talking about education of our kids, and it was vitally important that we engage with the faculty and the administrators in terms of how are we going to educate our kids in this new building? What advantages can we take from this new architecture and the advancements, obviously, in technology to help deliver our educational program to the kids. And in addition to that, it's a requirement of the MSBA as part of the submissions. So we went through a visioning process, much like was done with the master plan a couple of years back for the entire town, and much like is going to be undertaken by the school department in the coming months. There were members of the public involved, parents, educators, administrators, and essentially all of that input was brought to bear to provide the basis for the development of the educational plan that was submitted to the MSBA and will be reviewed by the DESE. Our assistant superintendent was kind of leading that charge and highly involved in it. And we're really happy with how that came out, the process and the product. We've actually gotten some really good reviews from the MSBA early on. with respect to our education plan. So we feel good about, you know, the whole purpose of the building, right, is to educate our kids and how we're going to go about doing that. So we feel really good about where we are with that. This is just a quick summary of the substance of the education plan. There's the development of a phenomenon-based learning kind of structure, which, to the extent that you have questions or want more detail about, I will direct you to our assistant superintendent, who can speak more clearly about it and in more detail. But certainly, we used that information to help inform how we approached designing the space and what needs we would need to accommodate various learning disciplines. One of the things that we're trying to accomplish with this project that the school committee, the school department, and the educators indicated what was a really important aspect was to expand our pre-K program. So currently, as you may know, we offer a pre-K program at East Elementary that was opened in 2009 that was essentially developed to accommodate kids with special needs, whether they be physical or psychological. There's also a component that includes what we call typical children. And for a long time, it was a very popular program. There was a lottery at some point to get into it. And we believe that there's going to be a significant demand for that going forward. And the school department has indicated that it's a priority for them to expand the pre-K program at Foster to the extent that we're able to. We expressed that desire to the MSBA. They were supportive of that, and they're going to participate in the reimbursement of spaces for that. So we're happy. So the plan is to expand our pre-K program in Hingham to Foster so that it'll be at East and Foster, and folks in the 2 districts to the south will go to one school, folks in the 2 districts to the north will go to the other school. And there are details here about how it'll be set up in terms of integrated and a substantially separated classrooms for those with significant special needs. And we're really happy that we're able to accommodate, you know, what we think is a growing demand in town, and we look forward to, you know, to be able to accommodate those folks. The other thing that we're including in this design is the development of 2 what we call social, emotional, and language-based substantially separate programs, which are new to Hingham. For those of you who have paid attention to, you know, the discussions over the last 4 or 5 years about the special education program and what we've done to improve it and what our deficiencies continue to be, there are many folks who still have to send their kids out of district for certain needs. And there are many programs out of district that offer what we're not able to offer because we don't have the space essentially to offer them. So this, the building of a new school in Crow Point allows us an opportunity to provide these programs where we can bring more kids back potentially into the district, reduce the out-of-district tuitions, and enable the delivery of these services to the kids who need them the most in our town. So we're you know, really eager to be able to offer these programs at the new elementary school, and those are included in the design. In terms of the site, many of you know this site. If you haven't been there, I invite you to visit it. It's really a wonderful natural site that has a lot of things going for it. And we're trying to, in our design, take advantage of every possible advantage that the site brings to bear. So there certainly are constraints that we have to navigate during the design and also the permitting process. But there are a number of opportunities as well that really present, great situations for enhancement of the learning opportunity. That's the southern exposure. We've decided to site the school facing the south. We have an opportunity to use the surrounding areas, the wetlands and the marshes, integrate those spaces into the curriculum. And we've taken into account the concerns and the suggested floodplain rises over the next 50 years into design, so that we will bring the school out of that equation and it won't be a concern in terms of future development. This is a picture of a proposed site layout. It's actually changed in the last week. We looked at a site layout plan last night, in fact, that is a little bit different than this. And I don't have the update yet because it's still kind of a work in progress. But essentially, if you look at this, Downer Ave runs north to south. So up here going toward the yacht club is north. So right in here is the existing building where I'm moving my cursor, where the parking lot and the proposed softball field will be. And what we're planning to do is design a building that will kind of sit into the hillside a little bit. We're going to create an access drive behind it, not only for construction vehicles initially, but also for emergency vehicles to access, as we know that's important. And also that's intended to be the parent pickup and drop off ultimately, in order to keep it segregated from the buses. So this is essentially where things will be laid out. The school will be here in kind of an open two-section design, where there'll be a main entrance here and a pavilion, essentially, a community wing here on the first floor, where there'll be gym and cafeteria and other spaces available to the public after hours that can be shut off from the rest of the building. And then over here, we'll have the pre-kindergarten and other academic spaces. And then this will be a 3-story building. As we'll go through the next slides, you'll see that the subsequent grade levels going up in the second and third floors. We are planning to, improve this space with a lot of play space, obviously, and outdoor classroom space that is going to be designed right up here, up against the wetlands. That will be a really great opportunity for the kids to experience, some of the stuff that if you went to PRS and you went to the 4th grade field trip, you got to experience firsthand. But if you didn't go on that, maybe you didn't experience, some of those outdoor attributes that we enjoy in Hingham, like marshes and uplands and different characteristics of the terrain that are available here. The one kind of neat thing that we're planning to do here and that we're able to do in the design is some of the hard surface that's currently parking area right here will be turned back into soft surface. And essentially we're turning about an acre and a half back to wetlands. And that's something that's going to be very important in the permitting process. And we've already had a preliminary meeting with the conservation agent and the folks in the planning office as well, with respect to what we're planning, and all of the responses so far have been very positive. So if you look at this little slide down here, you can see the existing building is an L shape, and this is where we're proposing to site the new building and how we'll lay out existing play space while we go through the construction. Here's what we call a massing exploration site, where you can see what the building elevation might look like next to the upland there, with a new parking lot here, softball field and tennis courts available for the community. Parent circulation drop off, buses coming in this way, going out that way. play areas over here. So we're really excited about how this is shaping up. It's actually even been revised over the last 48 hours. So what I'm showing you is probably not what will be the case in a week or so, but this is a good sense of what we're working on and just refining. In terms of floor plans, just real quickly, this is, essentially the first floor plan, as I suggested earlier, community wing on this side where there'll be a gym and a cafeteria with a stage linking the two, and music rooms, as well as a multi-purpose room that will be available after hours for community groups, for various uses. This can be completely shut off from the rest of the school for security purposes. And then this side with the administration and the pre-kindergarten on the first floor, will be a great opportunity to expand that program in our town. This is the second floor plans, which essentially put the first and second. First and second and third, if you will, and then fourth and fifth on the third floor. Each of those, there'll be 5 classrooms associated with each grade level, each of which will have what we call a commons in the middle. They're being designed as essentially neighborhoods, if you will, so that the teachers in those groups can really collaborate, and there's a lot of potential for grade level projects and things of that nature to use in this space. And that kind of gets them ready for the team concept that they meet in 6th grade when they get to the middle school. So just a quick look at where we are in terms of square footage. There are some variances with the MSBA guidelines. When we start this process, we go through what's called a space summary, and we start with a guideline from the MSBA, which says, okay, you can have this many classrooms and the classrooms are this many square feet. And you can have this many music classrooms and this classroom for this and this classroom for that, and this many spaces for special ed and this many spaces for this and that. And all of those things are incorporated into the design. And then we look at our educational program and what we're trying to deliver, right, to this community. And we say, okay, well, our educational program maybe exceeds what we need to deliver that program exceeds the guideline from the MSBA. And these are the reasons why. And what we do is we propose these variances, and then we enter into what's essentially a negotiation with the MSBA, where we say, well, we think we need these spaces because of our educational program, or because of the type of special education services that we're delivering, or whatever the reason. And it's a negotiation back and forth, and they tell us whether they'll reimburse or they won't reimburse. So we're in that process now. These are the initial variances that are kind of changing, on a very fluid basis, because we're just beginning the schematic design phase, and these will certainly change. But essentially what we're looking at is some variances that address some district-wide needs, which is the pre-kindergarten, as well as the KIA space. One thing I didn't touch on earlier is that our hope is to expand the Kids in Action program. For those of you familiar with that, it's a before and after school program, wraparound, for those who participate in it, which enables parents who are working to get their kids activities and at school at a point where they just can't they wouldn't be able to take them later, or they need time to be occupied or what have you. So we're looking to expand Kids in Action to this school as well, and that would essentially take place in the multipurpose room, that I identified. I just go back. Sorry, to make anybody's head spin. There's this multi-purpose room on the first floor. That's essentially the space that will house the Kids in Action program. They'll also use the gym and the cafeteria at times, but that's before and after school. That won't interfere with the rest of the educational program throughout the day. There are some additional special education spaces that we've talked about, those programs that we're hoping to, or the school department is hoping to be able to offer. One thing we learned about the gym at East School when it was built was that the runoff sideline is very tight on one side. And while we do have bleachers at East, it's a very tight sideline. And one thing we learned in this town is that we have a very robust basketball program in town and travel, and they use all of the gyms at all times, at nights and on the weekends, in fact. And we wanted to make sure that we designed it appropriately. And what we learned from the East design was that it was just a little bit too small. So we're looking to add a little bit square footage to that. There's some additional administration and guidance space that we were advised by the school department is needed. And then the KAA space that I suggested earlier, as well as a district-wide kind of focus on housing the Metco office here. Right now, I think there's a little space at the high school, but I don't think it's a real space for the Metco coordinator. So we're taking this opportunity to provide an actual space for that Metco coordinator for the district. But again, all of these things are kind of very fluid. There's certainly to be value engineering done as we move through the design phase, but just wanted to share those things with you. Just to go to kind of the numbers as we finish up here. We looked at 10 options over the last, I'd say, 6 months or so. And we unanimously settled on what we call option F as a new construction option that's at the bottom of this grid. This is the square footage that we're proposing at the moment. That's very fluid and it's going to change for sure. I suspect it'll be reduced from that number. And this is kind of a gross all-in number with all contingencies involved. So it's a big number. We recognize that. One thing to, I think, take into account for those of you who kind of don't follow school construction, and why would you? When we built the middle school, we went out to bid and we built that for $285 a square foot. That was 10 years ago. We're now looking at, and over the last couple of years, we've been looking at construction costs for elementary schools and middle schools across the Commonwealth that are between $500 and $600 a square foot, over $600 a square foot. That's not just due to COVID or the supply chain restrictions or constrictions, but that's due to just the escalation of construction costs and materials that are needed to build these schools. So it's essentially going to cost twice as much as it might have cost 10 years ago. And the unfortunate thing is that, of course, the MSBA has caps as to what they'll reimburse. They have a cap at $360 a square foot for normal construction costs. And they also have a cap for site costs at 8% of total construction costs. So that's obviously something that we're very sensitive to and we're taking into account as we look at design and explore potential value engineering opportunities as we move forward. This again is the slide I kind of started with that brings us back to the schedule with the overlayment of the specific kind of timeline for the work we're embarking on right now, which is schematic design that will get us, for a point where we can get our submission to the MSBA for approval at the end of August, and then for town meeting approval at a special session in the fall. That's what I have.
Thanks, Frank.
Happy to
Alright.
answer questions.
Good presentation, good information. I see Nancy's hand raised, so let's get to questions.
Thanks, Ray, as always, for an incredible presentation, and for all the work that you and your committee have done on this. And I think you've explained this before, and I just want to hear it one more time. The reimbursement amount by square footage, by square foot, is not in any way a statement of what they think it should be. It's just a statement of what they can pay. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. They set guidelines and they change them every year. I mean, in fact, our reimbursement percentage actually changed this year and went up. So whereas when we started feasibility, we were at 33.95% reimbursement. And we're now at 30 for this year, 2022, when we get approved by the MSBA in August, we'll be at 36.85% reimbursement. And that's a base rate, right? I believe we'll add to that with some points for our LEED certification and our operations and maintenance plan. So we could be 2 to 4% higher than that. But yes, in terms of the 360 per square foot, they set essentially a floor or a ceiling, if you will, and say, this is what we'll reimburse, up to this point. Anything above this point, you're on your own. That's the 360 a square foot for construction, and also the 8% for site costs.
And then what percentage of and I know it's fluid and I know things are going to change, but just rough guess on the design that we're looking at here, design F, what percentage of the total building is going to fall into that 30% that is going to be eligible for that 36% reimbursement?
Well, I think most of it, right? So looking at this slide here that I have up, you can still see this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the variances. There are a number of different buckets that don't get reimbursed, right? MSBA has its thresholds, the 360 a square foot, the 8% of site costs, right? Anything over 8% of construction costs for site reimbursement. And then it's got things like, a wastewater treatment plant. If you remember, for the middle school, we are on septic, so we need a wastewater treatment plant there. We don't need that at Foster because we're on sewer. So that's one thing that gets taken out of the equation, which is great. But there are other things that they deem ineligible. And some of the things that we've already gotten some feedback from in terms of ineligible reimbursements are some of the things that are on this slide that are listed as variances. Some of which they've already come back to us and said, yes, we will cover that. Some of them are still kind of a conversation that we're having that we'll continue to have through schematic design. And it's kind of a
when you
negotiation.
say that you think most of it, is it going to be 85%? Is it going to be 90%? Stab. I know it's not. It's
Yeah, I mean, if just taking this slide into account, so this is what, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So this is about 20,000 square feet identified in this space out of 126,000 square feet, right? That initially has been suggested may not be covered, but if you look at it, we've got core academic pre-kindergarten. We already have received feedback from them that that's going to be reimbursed. Special education, we've already received feedback that that's going to be reimbursed, right? We know that the larger gym will not be reimbursed, for example, okay? But we think that that's an important feature based on what we've learned. Some of the admin and guidance space it's kind of a back and forth at this point where they might reimburse some of it, but some of it not, depending on how it gets characterized. It's really a kind of a interesting dance, if you will. You know, if I had to guess, I'd say the KIA and the Metco office, this stuff down here at the bottom, they probably will not reimburse. So there is a component of this, certainly. It's not all of this, if call it
Okay.
20,000 square feet, if you will. It might be half of that or so that they won't reimburse because they don't deem it, you know, necessary or appropriate or what have you. But then, you know, we have to determine as a district and as a town what we think is necessary and appropriate in order to deliver our education. And the MSBA makes guidelines for, you know, 351 towns and cities in the Commonwealth, not just Hingham. So it
Right.
has to, you know, set a
Right.
low bar.
All right. Thank you, Ray. Appreciate it.
Bob?
Yes, thanks, Ray. And I have nothing but thanks, compliments, and admiration for all the work that the school building committee has done on this for so many years. I'm not really surprised by the project price. And I really have, I think, two observations, or maybe one observation and one question, more from the EdCom perspective. I'm a fervent supporter of this project, want to see the new Foster School, and you've done a great job. I suppose, you know, one of my questions is relating to the source of the funding and why it is non-excluded debt rather than excluded debt, where it seems like this is all ultimately going to be rolled into a big bond issue, probably after the use of bans for multiple years. And I suppose I'd appreciate more information from the town administration on that issue, although I suspect that it relates to the amount of the borrowing at this point, even though we're going into a special town meeting in the fall for a very substantial borrowing. I think, again, from the EdCom perspective, I think it would, I think I would like to see a more expanded comment, which would really serve as a foundation for the Foster School article that's going to be presented at the special town meeting that incorporates any number of the points that you've made tonight. And I'll leave my comments there.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bob. And Alan, Alan, I actually spoke earlier today, and I know he's working on a draft of the comment, and we'll be happy to provide any and all information that we can to help support whatever AdCom thinks the comment should be for this or the fall town meeting. So I agree with you. I did have conversations with Tom Mayo and John Coughlin, town council, when we were developing this article about the source of funding and how they would treat the borrowing. And, you know, they confirmed, and Michelle Monsignor confirmed, that they would likely issue the bans, you know, initially in the spring, and this would be rolled into the larger financing for long-term bonds going forward. So I defer to you and to town administrator to figure out that aspect of it. But that's consistent with the conversations that I've had. So that's my understanding of how they're going to approach it.
And if I can just add, there's one other thing too. I wondered whether it might not make sense for the school building committee to go to the MSBA with a 2/3 vote from both the town meeting and from the ballot as a premonition of what's going to happen after the special town meeting. I think this project has an enormous amount of support in the town. And, that might be a good early vote to have from a political viewpoint.
Yeah, don't disagree, Bob. I think that's up to, your group and maybe the select board determine about the debt exclusion. I think we got into a little bit of trouble last year with the article for PRS where the language dictated a debt exclusion that didn't happen. So there had to be some fudging done with that. So, I defer to your group and the select board and the town administrator to determine how, the best way for the town is to finance this. Ultimately, the initial interim funding that we're asking for the April town meeting is going to be rolled into the overall debt for the project, which of course will be a debt exclusion. At some point, if you had to ask me about the risk level for this funding, vis-a-vis the MSBA board approval at the end of August, I would say the risk is 0. But that's just an opinion.
Sue, do you want to weigh in at all right now about the decisions about borrowing for this project, or do we talk about it later, or do you want to, we can talk to Tom Mayo about it later?
Well, Tom's coming into the meeting later, and we've already recommended all the borrowing and how we're going to finance all these projects. So we can have him talk about it, but it is up to the town administrator as CEO on the borrowing aspect. And it is up to the select board whether or not it's a debt exclusion and to put it on a ballot.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Al?
Hi, thank you, everybody on the committee. And certainly, Bob, I know Evan and I are happy to dive back in and do a little more work on the comment to reflect those deeper thoughts. My question was just curious, Linda or Ray, if you could speak to the decision-making criteria for our information, just to going away from the option J there that was $90 million less. Just curious on the thought process the committee went through.
Sure.
Probably guess.
So,
hear it.
yeah. So, no, great. That's a great question. So option J is a code upgrade renovation. And it comes in at about $18.5 million. So imagine the existing Foster School, and if you haven't been in it, I welcome you to visit it, right? Built in 51, renovated in late 50s, and then again in the early 70s. And it's kind of a hodgepodge. And if we went in there and upgraded it for code, it would not solve our problems that we have in terms of delivering the educational curriculum. We still have, I think it's 8 classrooms that don't have separate exits or windows. They're tandem classrooms where you have to go in through one room to get to another room. So you essentially have to interrupt one class in order to get to another class in and out, because there's no exit, there's no windows, there's no other way to access it. So that wouldn't solve that issue. It wouldn't solve the fact that you've got a gym that's probably no bigger than my living room, and that's not very big. It wouldn't solve the fact that you've got no space for the whole student body to meet, and all of the other schools have that space. It wouldn't solve, code upgrades wouldn't necessarily solve the technology issues that you have, that you need in order to deliver the curriculum of the 21st century. It wouldn't
Also, about
address.
2/3 of that building is in the floodplain, and with the 50-year study, it wouldn't survive. So it really isn't I mean, even though we have that up there as an option, it really isn't an option. The only part of the building is the kindergarten wing that we would be able to save. I mean, we had
That's
to
right.
include that for the MSBA because they always want that as an option, but it really isn't an option, where the school is placed and what we can save of the school.
Yeah, that's maybe really the most important aspect of the reason why we can't do it, is because, you know, we've approached the design of this project, taking into account the existing studies that have been done, the Kleinfelder report in 2015, and the more recent studies that indicate that, you know, a significant portion of the site could potentially in a 500-year storm event be underwater in 50 years. So we have to design for that potentiality. And if we left the building where it is with just code upgrades, it would not accomplish the goal in addressing that issue.
Thank you.
George?
Thanks, Julie, and thank you, Ray and Linda, for a great presentation. Ray, I just wanted to go back to something you mentioned early on, and we've sort of touched on it a little bit with the Kleinfelder report, but the Globe did come out with an article this week in which they talked about, and I don't have all the specifics, forgive me, but apparently the rise in sea level, as described in this latest report, is significantly higher than previous reports. And I'm just wondering whether the Kleinfelder report took into consideration what is now known, but at the time they did it was maybe not known, and just exactly if there should be or is a concern with these higher flood levels, within the next 50 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we continue to work with this design, we'll take into account all of the studies that are current and, may, expand on, the prior studies that we've been relying on. I do think that, that this is not an issue that is specific to Foster and the Crow Point area. This is an issue that, and I don't have the slide here, but I could show you a slide that kind of represents most of downtown Hingham Square, the Broad Cove area, and adjacent neighborhoods that will all be underwater potentially if the sea levels rise to what they're predicted to rise to. And so the town is going to have to figure out how to address that from kind of a global town-wide perspective, not just for Foster. And that's essentially the answer we give to the MSBA as well.
Flexibility to adjust the plan, if you need another foot or so?
We do.
Okay.
We do. And we've
already increased it, I think, a foot or two, and we do have that flexibility to increase it another foot or so. And I think the important thing Ray's saying, and we have a slide that shows it, that it's not just a Foster school issue. Nobody's going to be able to get to Crow Point if we don't address it as a town and stop the flow through that marsh, as well as for the whole seaboard up from Boston all the way down to the Cape. It's going to be an issue. So, but we have, because the MSBA has been very interested and has really delved into that as well. So we feel that we've covered it as much as we can, and we feel pretty confident with the level that we're building it on.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
that's right.
You.
We've actually raised the level of the building, I think 2 feet in just the last couple of weeks. I think initially it was going to be at level 15, which is a foot above what the Kleinfelder report indicated was recommended for 2070 in a essentially 500-year flood situation. And I think what we looked at last night in a revised site plan gets us up to 17 or 17 and a half feet.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
All right, next up, Caitlin.
Thanks, Julie. Ray, you may have already said this, but is the the $3 million that's being put into the article this year, that would come out of the 105 option there, or is it in addition to?
No, it would be included in that ultimate number, whatever that ultimate number ends up being, whether it's 105 or it's 95 or it's some other number that's lower than that.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Tina?
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Ray and Linda. This was a great presentation. At our tour of Foster, it was like taking a tour back in time to be in Foster, almost back to like my own elementary school. So I couldn't be more supportive. I wondered, and I don't know if this is the place to ask the question, but historically with capital projects, we've done really well with like friends groups, friends of Hingham Public Schools, to support this project and get out there and get in front of this and educate the public so that people are able to air their questions before we get to town meeting. And I just wondered if you have identified or started kind of gathering that kind of group for this project.
Yeah, we've been working on it. I will tell you that the last 2 years have made that a little bit of a challenge, because not only have some of the parents that were really fully engaged 2 or 3 years ago about the potential of this project have moved on to the middle school or perhaps private school or even moved out of town. But a lot of the parents that are still in the foster community are they're just done. They just can't, and actually what we're seeing, and I was actually talking to the president of the PTO this morning about this at Foster, that a lot of new younger families have been moving into town the last 5 years. And because of the increase in real estate prices, a lot of them are 2-parent working households. So they don't have a whole lot of time to engage. They don't have a lot of time to volunteer, as many folks have done in the past when they've had more time available. So we're meeting a little bit of a challenge in getting that organization group. Believe me, I was talking about it just this morning with folks. So it's something that we've been working on. We're trying to engage with the community and get them supportive. We did have a community presentation last week where we had a number of parents from the foster community on the call, and went through and asked a number of great questions, including some older residents of the Crow Point community. So we're encouraged by the interest and the engagement, but we're certainly working to broaden it.
We actually talked about that in our meeting last night, because it was also something that we're interested in, getting someone from the foster community to start spearheading the project. I mean, we've set up a Facebook page, we've set up the website, we've posted videos of our community meetings, which we're going to continue to have, but we do feel that we need to get someone on board to start that effort.
Great. Yeah, I totally agree. And that's awesome. And I understand that's got to be challenging right now. Thank you.
Sarah?
Hi. Thanks. That was such an amazing presentation. Thanks, Linda and Ray. I wanted to speak to Tina's issue that she just raised a little bit. I am a foster school parent currently, and a foster school alum as well, and my husband too. I think I think I agree. People are zoomed out, me particularly. But I hope optimistically you might be surprised. I have a 5th grader currently. We won't be there for this. I'm so fully supportive of it. I think just having spent so much time there, both as a kid and as a parent, you've addressed so many needs that the school really needs fixing. I mean, even if you go up and down the stairs in that school, they've got railings that are unsafe, like a small child can fall underneath it. It's amazing. My sister did actually one year. You've just addressed so many huge needs. The space for the whole school gathering is a big one. And that's so big in community building. So, I hope optimistically you will find a lot of parents, even if they're moving on or have moved on, who still are very supportive of this. And I think too, during the pandemic, a lot of people who, you know, were very engaged with the school committee and everything else and everything going on, realized the huge issue presented by those back-to-back classrooms in the interior classrooms without any exterior windows or airflow. And that ended up being a challenge for the whole town, because ultimately it delayed when we could go back to hybrid school until we could get students into the rented St. Jerome space, because we had, you know, my daughter had a classroom, her classroom was moved to the cafeteria. So foster school couldn't open up back fully until that issue was fixed, because students needed to eat lunch to go back to full-time school. And so foster school was kind of holding up the entire town. And I think a lot of people were engaged and realized this is a huge issue. So, you know, I really do hope that maybe once people have had a chance to catch their breath here, that there will be a groundswell of parents in support of this. I certainly am myself, and that's more me personally rather than me AdCom, but both. So thank you for the presentation. It was really remarkable. I'm excited for this project.
Thank you.
Brenda?
Yes, hi. Thank you also for the presentation. Really sort of helped understand the planning going into this new school. I have no doubt that the town needs it. My question is, in terms of the new spaces that are being added for these cross-district needs, does that change the calculation of the number of students that are expected to be served at Foster?
It does not. The way it works when you partner with the MSBA on a new construction project like this is one of the first things that gets done during the feasibility phase is a design enrollment. And the design enrollment for this school has been set at 605, which is actually significantly above where the number is currently. I think before COVID, it was about 489 or so at Foster. It's dropped maybe about 70 students over the last year and a half. My understanding is the school department expects that most of those kids will come back, and the design enrollment is intended to accommodate an average enrollment, not a peak necessarily. So for instance, when we opened the middle school in 2014, the design enrollment was 1070, and we opened it and we exceeded the design enrollment at the time because we were in the middle of a bubble of population. But since then it's come down. With Foster, we know that there was, at the time we did the enrollment study, and the MSBA did it as well, probably 2 years ago now, they anticipated increased enrollment from the Avalon development, as well as, you know, birth rates and other factors. So we feel confident that we'll be able to, you know, not only accommodate the design enrollment with the normal population of Foster that's expected, but also the additional students that will be accommodated in the pre-K program and the special ed programs.
Well, thank you. The only thing I would just add for the comment from AdCom, for those in town who are new to town and don't know the story of Foster, and for those who haven't paid attention to the schools for some years, I think it is going to be important that we include the history of how old Foster is, the renovations it's been through, and the reason why a new school is needed. I think we need to include that now as well as in the fall.
Good point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. It's a good point. Nancy?
Thanks, Julie. I just wanted to follow up on Tina's comment, to just note that I think that all of us know full well that this is a very well supported project throughout the entire community. I haven't heard any constituency in town that would be against the Foster project. So I think, but I agree with, having been a previous Friends of Hingham Public Schools head of that, I would say that where the education needs to be is going to be on the cost. and educating as to, what the cost components are, how it feeds into supporting the curriculum that you want. Because I know, we had, as you are very well versed with, Ray, we had the same problem at the middle school, but it's not getting everyone excited about why we need a new school. I think everybody's on board with that. It's understanding the cost escalations that have happened with every public building, and Foster not to be excluded from that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nancy. It's really remarkable because it's not just school buildings, but it's all municipal construction, and not just municipal construction, but commercial construction in general. And if you look at the residential real estate prices in town and all over the Northeast, that certainly supports the premise as well. But if you just look at the last number of projects that we've done in town, East School was built for 26 million and change. That's a 92,000 square foot building. Okay. The middle school was built for $56.5 million. 8 years ago it opened. And that's 176,000 square feet, right? What we're talking about here is currently about 125,000 square feet. That'll probably be reduced some. So a little bit larger than what we built in East, but potentially 4 times as costly as it was to build East, 12, 13 years ago.
Well aware. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's remarkable. And there's nothing that we can do to change that reality.
True that.
Eveline?
So I just wanted to say, as they're following into this conversation, I think there's a lot of support for this project, but the cost is concerning, particularly for people. There's been a lot of talk about parents, but there are a lot of non-parents or parents of adult children who may not be looking at this school project with quite the same maybe anticipation or need as others. And so I think there really is a need to include that in the education. But I think it's also why there's a need for the funding sources. It's as the plan has been to use the reserve fund to try to offset some of that debt in the first 3 years, I think is really important, because I keep remembering that number of citizens in our town who live on incomes of under $75,000 a year. And so when you start talking about their tax bill going up with non-excluded bills, they may fully support the school, but they also may like, food and medical care and things like that. So I think it's really important to sort of think about everybody in our community and how we can use the reserve fund to help offset some of that. So that's all I wanted to say.
David, that's it, because it's a great point, and I don't think it's specific to just those folks who may have a lower income in town. I mean, I can tell you, when I heard the Sustainable Budget Task Force report a couple of weeks ago, I was struck by comments about where we are in terms of our tax rate and our tax revenue, and then where we are in terms of average income in town. And a lot of those numbers don't take into account the fact that people may have multiple kids in college. People may have other expenses, whether it's an aging adult parent or whatever it is. It's all subjective, right? So we all have our expenses regardless of what we make, and tax dollars are important to all of us. And when I saw my tax rate go down, but my real estate taxes went up significantly because of the valuation, it affected me just like it affected anybody. So I think it's important that we look at all of these projects very carefully for everybody across the income spectrum, and make sure that we, make the best choices in terms of utilizing financial policy, that will benefit, the largest group of people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So AdCom members, I'd like to just keep the discussion going about the comment and suggestions for Al to, sounds like we would like an expanded comment that has more of a background information about the history of Foster, you know, how old it is, and information about the MSBA process and milestones in recent years. And then I know that we would want to clarify that the funding amount that is being requested right now is part of the total project cost. And that would be interim funding that would bridge from at the end of April to the end of October. And I'm also hearing that we would, let's see, looking at my notes in different places. Well, that's what I have so far. Daveline?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it might be helpful to at least have a little bit of discussion of the of how the project is taking into effect climate change and rising sea levels. And just as an introduction to that, because it seems to me that's part of the cost issue. But it's also, we have a town that's very committed to the issues around net zero and to the issues of rising seawater. So I think we might want to introduce that as well.
Yeah, Al, we can help you with some of that narrative if it would be helpful, because we have some of that kind of already produced for some of our submissions to the MSBA.
Super.
That's
Love it.
great. Thanks, Ray. Andy?
Yeah, Ray and Linda, that was just a marvelous presentation. It really was very comprehensive and clear. Much appreciated. To say nothing of the billable hours that it represents, I can only imagine.
You'll get my bill in the morning, Andy.
I wish I could reimburse those billable hours, Ray, but unfortunately. My question is, does your committee look at what the new school building will do with regard to the annual operating expenses of the school department, and what impact, if any, it will have, or is that beyond the charge of the committee?
No, that's something that we're looking at it in the context of the design. In fact, last night at our meeting, we had a comprehensive presentation from engineers with respect to options available for HVAC to heat and cool the building. And, you know, we made a commitment, you know, subject to feasibility, if you will, but we made a commitment as a committee from a policy standpoint early on that this was going to be an all-electric building, right? And so what we're looking at is options for HVAC, heating and cooling, that will, you know, accomplish the goals of net zero ready. And in conjunction with that, we're looking at, you know, not only the upfront costs for, you know, the infrastructure to implement that, but also the life cycle costs, right? In terms of operations and maintenance, and then, you know, the ability to recover those costs over time. So we're looking at, you know, certainly we learned when we built East and when we built the middle school that when you build a new school that's going to be larger than the existing, that's going to use more energy, it's going to cost more. But because of the efficiency in the types of systems that are utilized, right, that efficiency ends up giving you cost savings over time, and not just over time, but actually annually initially. And we started to look at those numbers last night, and those are numbers that we're going to look at very, very seriously, and we'll be able to speak to more in detail as this design moves forward. I would suspect in a few months, when we have, you know, more of a concrete design and more of the concept fleshed out and then costed, we'll be able to, you know, we'll be able to speak you know, in more detail about what the life cycle costs will be, what the annual operations and maintenance costs will be as compared to the current.
And even we were talking last night with some of the net zero options, there is a small amount of grant money that hopefully we'll be able to take advantage of as well. I think for 10 years at least, to offset some of those costs.
Yeah, we're excited about, you know, where things are with HMLP currently. You know, we know that they're embarking on kind of an investigation of all town properties and buildings to explore the feasibility of installing solar. And we're excited to kind of partner with them because this building will be constructed as a solar ready building, not necessarily having panels on it on day one. And to the extent that we can, you know, maybe work with HMLP to accomplish that goal at the beginning, you know, we'd be thrilled to be able to do that because that would not only accomplish, you know, some of our net zero goals, you know, goals of the Commonwealth in terms of getting to, you know, to energy efficiencies and carbon footprint reduction over time, you know, but also reducing the cost of operating the school.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Anyone else from AdCom have any comments about the comment and what they would like to see added or changed? Caitlin?
I just wanted to, when David Lee was suggesting to add in the, what was it, the floodplain, or what was it?
Yeah.
Climate change issues?
Climate change, yes, okay. Also, I think just make sure, sorry, make sure it might be good to add in that we've looked throughout the town and there's like nowhere else to put the school, because I think that could be a question that comes up. So just a suggestion there. And then I think, you know, for the, maybe not for this comment, for the town meeting later on, just, I think it would be good, Ray, just to understand like what's the cost impact of getting the building to net zero, just because I think without the education, it may come up that that's driving up the cost. So I think just to negate that point, if that isn't the case, it would be good to make sure that that's clarified for the town.
We did
Yeah, no.
ask the estimators last night, because they didn't give us an option of what it would be if we weren't all electric. So they're going to come back to us at our next meeting with pricing on that as well, so we can make an informed decision and also have that information to be able to give to everybody else in town.
That's perfect. That's great. Because
Yeah,
I know
no,
my house was all electric when I first moved into it, and I had a monthly bill close to $900 a month just to heat it. So in my mind, electric is really expensive, and so I think the education around that is going to be critical.
No, we told our architect and engineers that, you know, we were committed to trying to design, you know, an all electric building that would be net zero ready, if that were, you know, feasible from a financial standpoint, right? If and some of the numbers, as Linda alluded to, that we started to look at last night, you know, started to kind of tell that story of what the delta would be in terms of upfront costs versus return and investment and life cycle costs and maintenance and operations and things of that nature. So we've asked them to, and they'll come back to us in 2 weeks, actually. We'll have this information in 2 weeks, because that's when we're going to make a decision on how we're going to heat and cool this building. Essentially, what it would be if the building were just, you know, gas operated, fossil fuel, versus, you know, the electric option that we're looking at. So we specifically told them we're going to get that question, so we need to be able to answer that question.
Exactly. Yeah, I know you guys are being really thoughtful, making sure you have the background for the town just to really thoroughly understand it. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
So, right now with the comment that we want to put to town meeting explains general background of the project and what's going to happen, and the taking into account net zero capability, but, you know, a lot of the details on that will be better for the comment, I think, in the special town meeting in the fall, because we wouldn't have that information. You know, can't wait a couple weeks on the comment for that, but I think that it's important to start that conversation so that people understand that the design takes those elements into account. Nancy?
I just wanted to say that what we're doing here, I mean, relative to this particular warrant article, I feel like if we overload the comment, it's gonna confuse what we're actually trying to do. And I don't know if Ray or Linda have an idea on that, but I feel like if we try to overload this, that it suddenly becomes the school project as opposed to this financial thing we're trying to accomplish for 4 months.
I think you definitely have to give it some context, right? But I think the approach should be largely the same way that the public safety building has been approaching the phases in which it's gone about moving its project forward, right? From, feasibility to design to construction documents to construction money, right? So I would equate this phase as to construction documents, if you will, similar to theirs, which will enable us to, go out to bid for, to finish design sufficient to prepare documents that will allow us to go out to bid for the first phase of the project. But it's a little tricky because you do need the background, but you want to give just so much of it and not to, bombard folks with the minutia and the detail. So it's not an easy task, Alan.
Good luck, Al.
Yeah,
Caitlin,
Nancy,
do
I
you
was
want-
just thinking a couple of sentences. I wasn't.
Yeah,
thinking
no, I
more
know.
beyond-
I was just thinking
Yeah.
it felt like we were piling on. I just wanted to.
Evan can handle it.
Big group think exercise. Caitlin, did you have anything else to add?
No, I just forgot to put my hand down.
Oh, okay, all right. So I wanted to ask AdCom members how you feel about, well, we've identified areas that we want to expand on in the comment. So I'm not sure if we feel like we would be ready to vote tonight on this article because we don't have all the information put together in the comment and the recommended motion unless people feel otherwise. So
I think I'd like to wait and see the expanded comment.
anyone else?
I agree. And just to raise the question we talked about before the meeting we need to have the borrowing language added to the
Yes.
recommendation.
So there are, Al, there are 2 extra, Ray, I know you supplied the language that MSBA would like, which is great, but also because, and we would also need to add to the article that it requires 2/3 majority vote because it's borrowing, that we also have to add 2 little extra paragraphs onto the recommended motion that give borrowing language that the town needs to have in the recommended motion. And I have that language I can give you, Al.
Yeah, just send that over, Julie. It's standard language.
Yeah, I think, Julie, I think in the proposed recommended motion, most of the language came from the MSBA. I think I included in highlight language about a debt exclusion because at that time I didn't know what the intention was in terms of how this was going to be treated. So obviously that, however you decide that's going to be handled.
So this is just recommended language from the MSBA, but we can amend it as we see fit. with
Yeah,
the
I do
language that we want.
I do think that they want to be able to see what you change. So to the extent that we can give them a little bit of a heads up when you have a recommended motion that you think is close to final form.
They're pretty particular and they are going to want to have a final say on it.
Yeah, they actually have a legal department and they look at it and they come back with comments, and a lot of it's canned language and a lot of it's checking boxes, but it's, it is what it is.
Well, so question, why would we change what they put in there? Why would we just not add the 2/3 vote and the piece on the borrowing? And if it's not going to be a debt exclusion, we can erase that language, but other than that, everything stays.
Well, right now, the recommended motion, I don't see any borrowing language or debt exclusion language that's in this document, unless I'm missing something.
I think if you have what I sent you, I think in what's in highlighting is borrowing language.
All right, so. it got
Consistent
cut.
with
I think
prior.
Evan, did it get cut off? Is that?
Julie, whatever you sent went into the recommended motion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
we
I
need the
sent-
First
borrowing
sentence says
language
borrow.
for the treasurer. We need the borrowing language about the treasurer has the authority to borrow. And then we need the language about any premium. So those two paragraphs have to go in.
Okay, and those are just canned, those two, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Evan,
Yeah, we'll just-
they're in the, and now they're in the other article that got distributed tonight.
And Julie, the first sentence does say that the town raise and appropriate, borrow,
Yes,
or transfer.
but they're, okay. So we'll work this out offline and we'll figure out the right recommended motion with the correct borrowing language. And we will certainly run it by you, Ray and Linda, to make sure that we have it correct.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll just have to make sure that, I don't know what the turnaround time that they're going to need for it. Ray, because normally, we can't give them something and say, we need that back tomorrow. I'm just trying to think of time frame that you need it finalized by.
Well, we're not meeting next week. And then we start meetings again in March, 2 times a week. So,
But again, it's not, the recommended motion is not changing all that much. We're adding the 2 additional paragraphs, right? So I think I don't think they'll have issue with that. That's something that we have to include for the treasurer, right? And the funding source. And we've just lifted what Ray sent over to Julie. So there's any tweaks in that upfront language?
I just resent you the article and the recommended motion that with the language that came from the MSBA and the highlight in the recommended motion is borrowing language, but obviously you revise it as you see fit, but.
did you forward it to me, Ray?
I just resent it to you now. Yeah.
To Julie Straley 9?
I sent it to the email I have for you. I don't know what that is.
I got it. Okay, sorry, I got it.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll send that over to Alan Ray, just make sure we're work that out. Anybody else have anything that they want to talk about with regard to this article or the comment? Does everyone feel comfortable with working on an updated comment and then coming back to vote? Or does anyone feel strongly that we should vote tonight without updated comment?
So I guess my point, and I would actually agree with Nancy, in updating the comment, I don't think we should overload the comment. And David, thank you for clarifying. It's like a sentence.
Yeah.
But this is a project since 2017. I don't think we need to drag all that history into a bridge gap funding article for a school that everybody wants.
You can write a couple of sentences easily to explain
Yes,
the
we
arc
can.
of the timeline.
But I just want to set
for
expectations.
Foster
This isn't going to be like a page longer. It kind of. I see that you want to strangle me right now, Julie. I think we're overcomplicating it.
I hear you, Evan. Thank you. Andy?
We are not meeting next week, as you pointed out, so our next meeting is a week from Tuesday. Would it be beneficial for Ray and Linda for us to vote tonight, so you have a recommended article to take to the MSBA? Or can it wait for a week from?
I think it can wait. We don't need
Yeah.
anything to take to them at this point.
We don't.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No, we're expecting approval from them on March 2nd based on what we've already submitted, and the warrant article has no bearing on that. We just have to provide evidence of local funding within a certain period of time of their approval. So we're fine.
Okay, great. Well, then obviously we have all the information we need so far, and then we'll be in touch with you, Ray and Linda, for any extra information for the comment. And thank you for coming tonight. And this is a really good discussion. And
Thank
we
you.
will
Great presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate the
come
time.
to vote in
Yeah, thanks,
when we
guys.
meet sometime in 2 weeks.
Okay, look forward to it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Bye. Have a good night.
Good night, guys. Thanks.
Okay, so next up we have on our agenda to continue our hearing and take a vote on Article Q, the South Shore Country Club pool. I know that Christine Smith is here tonight and Kevin Whalen, in case anyone have any questions. I circulated an updated comment about the article and wanted to know if anyone had any questions or comments. Go ahead, Bob.
I guess I'm not going to repeat everything I said before about using excess unrestricted fund balance. I still think it makes sense, especially since now this is going to be the only article that's going to go on the ballot. And I think that maybe some further thought about maybe a combination of non-excluded debt and fund balance could be given. I think in our recent deliberations, any number of people on this committee have indicated a preference for using the tax dollars that are represented by excess unrestricted fund balance sooner rather than later. And as I understand it, from the discussion of the last article, that the funds involved in that article are ultimately going to be rolled into long-term debt. And that's probably not going to happen until 2027. And although I understand the process of committing and therefore taking $7 million out of excess unrestricted fund balance, it does seem to me that we have a shovel-ready project that can be delivered in 2023 that we have the ability to fund now. And I think as the discussion between Andy and Sue went last week, that it is likely that excess unrestricted fund balance, at least based on history, is going to increase between now and 2027. And I don't want to throw a monkey wrench in the works tonight, but I think it's an issue worthy of continued thought. And the way the recommended motion is worded, it permits the use of available funds. And were a determination to be made between now and the town meeting, say at the time when we vote on the reserve fund transfer to use available funds, I think we would have the opportunity to give some supplemental consideration to this article and perhaps make a different supplemental recommendation going into the town meeting, and I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. I would just like to add that I have discussed the funding of this article a number of times with the town administrator's office. Sue can attest to I keep coming back to discuss this, and even as late as this afternoon, I was able to meet with the bond counsel for the town, with Sue and Michelle Monsegur and Art Robert, and talk about what are options, what the town has for options. And as we discussed last week, with the plan laid out by the town administrator, we have a list of projects that we would be put towards borrowing that fits within the levy. And the capacity right now would be about $5 million total projects. So earmarked for that would be the construction funds for Foster and Plymouth River School and the Plymouth River School Windows project. And if you add that all up, the pre-construction funds are about $4.7 million, but then the PRS project has enough offsets from the MSBA reimbursement, mitigation from Broad Cove, and then Sue's unspent capital projects funds article that, those things can fit in the levy. And then the town administrator's office has laid out a plan for use of unassigned fund balance, spending about $3 million in 2 medium-sized projects at annual town meeting this year, the high school tennis courts and the the fire department capital projects. And then that leaves the plan to use $7 million for mitigation for increase in taxes to, as we saw on the slide, then the increase in the spike in taxes when those large projects that are on for a special town meeting in the fall would hit the taxpayers. So I understand. I understand your arguments, Bob, and I just all I can offer is that right now it's not our decision, and does not sound like the decision of the town administrator is going to change. But
well, I do think that the public safety facility funds and the Foster school funds really both are ultimately going to end up as part of a big debt exclusion. And to put them into non-excluded debt at this point, when we could be using excess unrestricted fund balance for a shovel-ready project that's deliverable now, just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I'll stop there.
well, the town administrator is coming to our meeting a little bit later, so perhaps you can make another pitch. Daveline?
I was just going to say, and I've sort of already said that this evening, but as somebody who's concerned about fund balance, I like how we're using it. I like how the proposal is to use it for basically to help with Foster and the public safety facility. But there's something about, I don't know exactly how to put this, but there's some discussion about what kind of pool we should have, and things like that. And I think it's good to actually have people decide that. But somehow to take the money that we've been setting aside saying this is for Foster, and now say, oh no, we're going to use it on a pool. There's something about that I think is just unsavory, in some way, that it just doesn't, it seems like it's spending money. I'm not saying a pool isn't a good use of money and the town shouldn't have the pool, but I think the town far more needs a public safety facility and a new Foster school. And that's what we've been saying we would use this money for. So I agree with the town administrator's plan. So just so there's another voice, I guess, on the other side. That's all.
Thanks, Daveline. And I'd like to add that when I was in the meeting this afternoon with bond counsel, he mentioned something that I never really thought about in terms of this, but he said, you know, you may want to consider how it would be more equitable that through borrowing with debt payments spread over the years, the cost of this project is spread out over time with costs to be borne by future users of the pool, that the cost wouldn't come now on all the current residents at this time, that it's just spaced out over time. And it's something that I hadn't really thought about before, but it's just another way of looking at it. Tina?
I don't want to belabor this, and I really appreciate that last comment, Julie, but I do have to say I would stand with Bob right now on this.
Thank you. Andy?
I echo what Tina just said. I'm wholly supportive of Bob's recommendation to use fund balance.
All right. Evan?
So I'm gonna go full on Gemini on the crew right now. I actually appreciated Evelyn's comments about, you know, we've been saying we're gonna do one thing with it and then using it for another. But I do think, and it just feels like with a ballot vote and the debt exclusion and no seawalls, it puts the pool project under, you know, a degree of scrutiny that other projects may not have to go through to get funded. And I think I've heard from a number of folks in town and actually on this committee how it's something outside of the schools that we're spending money on, and it is a community asset. So I would love for us to figure out how to maybe, you know, parse some of the funds out, knowing that things like the Plymouth River schools are going to be a much smaller kind of hit to the overall budget than we anticipated. So I agree with Tina, Bob, Andy, and Evelyn on this one. And I just think we need to, maybe Bob, your powers of persuasion could be better used on Tom.
Let me add him.
George?
Thanks, Julie. And I know we don't want to belabor this discussion, but I can't let Daveline sit out there all by herself. And I do want her to know that there's somebody else on AdCom who somehow it just doesn't sit right with me to use almost 70% of our free cash to fund a pool that's open 3 months a year. I just don't, everything aside, the optics of doing something like that with money that we have been saving for years for designated purposes, it just doesn't sit right with me. So that's all I want to say.
Okay. Thanks, George. Anyone else want to chime in about this question, which we can pitch again to town administrator's office, or have any other comments about the comment, about any of it? I see Andy and Evan's hands raised.
Oh no, mine's, I just haven't put mine down.
Okay.
I just pulled an Andy.
You all said Andy? Okay, Caitlin.
Thanks, Julie. I just had one question reading the comment. So in our previous discussions, it was coming across to me that if we were to want to move forward with the bubble at a later point in time, that wouldn't have to go to town meeting. But I see in the article that we're specifically calling out that would be subject to a town meeting vote.
Well, I think what the, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, what were you gonna say?
Well, I think what the comment's getting at is that however the bubble is purchased, however it's installed, you'd have to pay for the operating of this pool on a year-round basis. And it's not something that you know, the country club could just sort of make up on its own. I mean, it would have to be, it's the town pool. And what I'm saying is that town meeting would have to take some kind of vote because it would be part of the operating budget, or, you know, I don't know all the mechanics of it, but I just know that it's not something that can be unilaterally made without a vote of some kind.
Okay. And actually, Julie, I like that comment because I felt like before, I liked having that comment because I thought before it felt like it was not going to go back to town, which I think I had a little slight issue with. So I like the addition of it, was where I was going with that.
Okay. Sarah?
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciated the clarification as well. Because I do think it's kind of important to view it still as a two-step process. It's not, I personally don't feel that, making a pool that's bubble ready is an indication that we, have to or necessarily will go through with a bubble without proper vetting of that, and including the operating expenses. And I just don't think we're at the point, with the vote now that we have thoroughly looked at all of those operating expenses, possible funding sources for those, all those kinds of things that we would have an opportunity to do in the future. At the same time, I think, we really shoot ourselves in the foot trying to build a 50-year pool that does not have that option whatsoever, when there are a lot of constituents in town who want it and would use it. So I really did appreciate the clarification and kind of make it clear that this is still a two-step process. Thanks.
Caitlin?
No, I just got my hand again, sorry.
Oh, okay. Anybody else from advisory committee want to discuss the comment or anything else related to the pool? Okay, so I see that we have some hands raised for people who are not an advisory committee. And as many of you are aware, we spent 2.5 hours last Tuesday discussing this project. And we really appreciate the input of people who came to our meeting last week, especially the abutters. And I'm going to take any questions or comments right now, but I'd ask respectfully that you raise issues that we did not already cover last week. And I'm also going to set a time limit of 10 to 15 minutes max for this discussion, because we've heard from all of you, and I see also your hands are raised. We also received letters from each of you as well. So we have other business we have to get to tonight, and we just want to set those parameters. So with that, I see Priya Howell. Could you give your address, please?
Thanks, Priya Howell, 26 Del Pret Drive. I'd just like to ask a clarifying question. I don't have whatever your proposed language is in front of me, but I think a big part of my concern as someone who supports the schools is having something in our budget going forward that would be a drain on the budget. As we talked about last time, year-round pools generally run at a loss. I don't object to there being a seasonal pool at the country club at all. But if it was truly a two-step process, I would feel a lot better about that. But my understanding about the operating budget is it would just be like anything else. It would be a line item on the budget, and someone would have to put a hold on that line item and object to, us funding a shortfall, which is a lot different than having a separate warrant article saying, town of Hingham, do you want a year-round pool? So just a question or clarification, if you could, like, how exactly does that work? Is it just through the budget process? The town of Hingham could object to anything on the budget any year? Or would there be a separate warrant article in which the town would get to consider whether they really wanted a year-round pool?
So the advisory committee, our job is to create a budget to send to town meeting every year. So when I use the word vote, I'm also thinking about town boards such as the advisory committee, who would never intentionally, who wouldn't vote for a deficit budget or an operating budget that didn't cover itself with revenues. So I don't know the future of the mechanics of how it would happen or come to pass that the town would move forward to put a bubble in place. But what we're voting on right now and what we're hearing and what we've been discussing is the building of the pool that does have that capability, but we're not voting on the mechanics of that when that capability comes to pass.
So I'll just say this one last thing, and I would just ask that you, in writing the comment, not suggest that there would be a separate warrant article in a future town meeting, or make it sound like that's the process.
It doesn't say that.
And again, I can't see it, but thank you for taking my question.
Sure, thank you. Chris Jones?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Julie. Chris Jones, 20 Delpret Drive. I don't have the proposed article in front of me either, but one of the concerns was just the clarity on folks from Hingham understanding what they're voting for. And at least up until the work that the AdCom's done, it seemed as if those that were familiar with the project either felt like they were voting for a seasonal pool or felt that they were voting for a year-round pool. And the way it seemed to be proposed was nobody would get what they wanted, which is those who believed they were voting for a seasonal pool might get stuck with a year-round pool and the cost associated with that. And those that thought they were voting for a year-round pool, the coach, we heard a letter from the coach on the last one, may not be getting a year-round pool. So I think clarity and disclosure of cost of either model is critical in the warrant. And I'm hoping the work that's being done by the AdCom shines a light on that. And I do think we need clarity on the bubble process, because to the extent, again, those vote for a seasonal pool and feel they got that through the town warrant process, all of a sudden private funds are used for a bubble, or whatever is being proposed for this reserve budget gets used to fund a bubble. And I don't know if that's genius or derelict. That's for you to figure out. But it does seem like the exploitation of a loophole to possibly benefit a very small population of folks that would really be keen on using a year-round pool. So I would hope that the committee proceeds with caution as far as that goes. But I do hope the warrant shines a light on what exactly is being put in front of the town for voting purposes, and then the associated cost with each model. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to ask, or anyone from advisory committee have anything to add? Are we ready to make a recommendation?
Yes.
Does anyone want to give the recommendation?
Want to read it, Julie?
Sure.
Just pull it up. I was toggling between the two. Okay, recommend that the town vote to, this is the right one, yeah, raise and appropriate borrower transfer from available funds not to exceed 8 million for the design and construction of a new pool at South Shore Country Club, or act on anything related thereto. To meet said appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the select board, is authorized to borrow said sum under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 7, or any other enabling authority to issue bonds or notes of the town, therefore, and further provided that the appropriation hereunder shall be subject to and contingent upon an affirmative vote of the town to exempt the amounts required for the payment of the interest and principal on said borrowing from the limitations on taxes imposed by Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 59, Section 21C, Prop 2.5. And then there's our standard premium.
Right, I
Clause.
added the extra borrowing clause. Can I get a
Yep.
second? Any other discussion?
Just to delete the or act on anything relating to there too. And probably instead of will, it should say that, because that's our normal.
Yeah, the latest copy that I circulated has that, the
Oh,
town.
okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Okay.
but I delete or act on anything relating there too.
Yeah, because that's,
Yeah.
we don't recommend that. That's in the,
In the article, got it. Okay, we come to vote on Article Q. Bob,
And a vote aye with an asterisk that we keep thinking about the funding source.
okay. George,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Daveline,
I,
Brenda,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Al,
Aye. What does an asterisk get me? Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Caitlin,
Aye.
Sarah.
Aye.
Okay, I've got 13. Okay, so up next on the agenda, let's see. I didn't have a liaison update. Okay, so I had the warrant process update next on the agenda, which I already gave that at the beginning of the meeting about the 2 new articles and then the 2 articles which were withdrawn. But I wanted to also add that if everyone can keep working on your articles, we're making good progress. And if you can send out the draft of your comment to the extent that it's possible to AdCom as soon as possible, so we can really dig into the comments and give good edits well ahead of the meeting. So that's all I have on the warrant article process update, except to say that George has updated the WAS and we have a Google document that maybe we'll be working on. I sent a request to you, George, about getting authorization to that form.
Okay, let me look for it.
yeah, I think that's.
I have not used Google Docs before, so I got some
Easier than you
directions
think,
from
George.
Dave and put it together. And now I've got to understand what this authorization process is all about. So, but not a discussion for AdCom meeting tonight.
And Sue, can you check in with if you haven't already, with Tom
I
Mayo?
already texted her. I'm waiting for her response.
Okay, I know that they had a really long meeting over on select board side tonight, so. But Kristen, you have your hand raised?
I just have a question. I know the select board still hasn't heard the warrant for the personnel board. Is there any update on that?
The personnel board will be meeting sometime in early March. I think that's what I heard, George, in our meeting this week. So they have to vote on it.
Okay.
So don't expect it the first week of March.
Okay.
Maybe the second week of March.
Kristen, are you looking for their report or Article 4D?
So the report, just so I know what would be to put in the article, to put in the comment.
Because they were meeting tonight, and they were approving the annual report of the personnel board. But Article D and E, 4 and 5, they won't be discussing, I think, until March 10th.
Okay.
I thought Article D was report of the personnel board.
No, they have a report that goes in the warrant first. It tells all about, you know, what they did all year long.
But that's not Kristen's article.
Oh,
That's in the town book, right?
no, it's
Yeah.
in the warrant. There's a report of the personnel board in the warrant.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. But it's not one we vote on,
I don't think so. No, they just.
right?
vote
It's
on
just a
it.
report like other people do, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We're trying to get them to have an earlier meeting, but I'm not sure we'll be able to.
While we're waiting,
all
do we have anything on Article EE, the traffic speed limit one, on when that might be? Okay.
Okay, she's got 5 minutes. She said 5 minutes, Julie.
Okay. Well, I was going to talk next about discussion of advisory committee housekeeping items. And I did not, though, Daveline, I did not have any information about that article.
Okay. BB, I'm sorry, that's what it is. I knew that was wrong.
Oh, wait.
The selectmen would just vote, had it on their
Yeah,
agenda
they-
tonight.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry. They had it on for tonight, BB. I'm getting
And it
myself
was,
confused. I
it was approved.
apologize.
Okay,
Okay.
because I did finally make contact with all those, so I'm ready for that whenever you need it.
Okay. So I'll tell you something about what I'm planning for March 1st so far. So maybe that can help. We got to set a framework for when we hear, but so for upcoming meetings, we are off next week. And then we resume on Tuesday, March 1st, and then we meet again on Thursday, March 3rd. So far, what I know is going to happen on March 1st is that we are going to meet jointly with the select board and the school committee to review an updated forecast. It will have almost all the information that we want to have before we reconcile the budget. And then also at that joint meeting, advisory committee will stay on with the select board and I believe hear the presentation of the selected capital outlay committee projects. And I'd also like to hear that night articles CC, G, and HH, which is the new article that George has about reallocating borrowed but unspent funds.
This is on the 1st, Julie?
Yes.
I thought I got the week off.
You do have the week off. But as you know, we have to fit back in a vote for Foster. And then we have things such as the BB and E and GG. It's hard to keep track of this all. So anyway, in the coming week.
I'm sorry, what are the articles that you want to hear on the 1st? HHG, and what was the first one?
And CC.
C is in Carol?
G is in golf.
Yeah.
HH and CC as in Charlie, Charlie.
As in the light plant one. Yeah.
I know, perhaps I should just use the titles, but it's easier, quicker
And
to.
what, are there any articles on the 3rd?
Yes, we will do more articles on the 3rd as well, but we're also planning to do a discussion on the school budget on the 3rd. So I have to spend the next week figuring all that out about how to set up an agenda so we're not up till late. Like to try to avoid that. And then we don't have any hearing dates for the planning board articles yet because the planning board is not done yet. So.
The planning board expects to complete their work on February 28th on the two outstanding articles.
Great, so then they could get on the agenda for the select board that first week maybe, and then we could possibly cover them on March 7th.
Andy, I talked to Emily Wentworth today. I don't know if something changed, but I felt like she was talking about AdCom the week after, Julie, the week you just referenced, like into the 15th, 17th.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I should have jotted it down as a quick conversation, but seemed to think it wouldn't come to us until that week.
Okay,
Julie,
yes.
are we going to have a traditional town meeting, or has that been, that bridge been crossed yet?
We're still waiting to hear back from the legislature about the request that the town put in to have a town meeting on Saturday, April 30th. So that would be outside.
Yep.
I don't think we have come to the point yet where we're going back into the gym. No.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry, Julie, so what day, what Saturday would it be?
April 30th.
April 30th. Okay, thank you.
And then there's a plan for, building in some potential rain dates. And I don't have that concrete information for you, so I'm not even going to speculate, but they'd have to have rain dates because
It might rain.
Does it rain?
it's rain. I also wanted to mention in the housekeeping items that in normal times, advisory committee used to have a party every year at the end of the season after town meeting and after the town election. Some of you more experienced AdCom members would remember that the freshmen or the first years were always on the hook for planning that party. George and Bob and I had the crazy party planning where it was supposed to be at someone's house, and then we had to switch it last minute, the location. But the idea is advisory committee has a party for members of town committees that we worked on, warrant articles during warrant season, and for people who work for the town. And it's just sort of something that advisory committee has done, I don't know, for however long. And the last time we had the party was actually outside. It was in 2019, and it was at the Heritage Museum out on that nice patio that's on the left-hand side of the building. There's a little porch that overlooks it. So I broached the idea with Tom Mayo this week just to check to see if the town would be open to having that kind of party, and seemed like he was interested in that. So I just wanted to check in with you all about that as well. It's usually done in June, and I would have to clear the date with first with the select board and the town moderator, and I'll also tell you about it. But
well, it'd be nice to have
great idea.
wait, what's that?
Go ahead,
Evan?
Evan.
Oh,
I just said
Evan?
it would be nice to have a party in person.
Yeah.
I'd like to meet some of you guys in person.
I know.
I saw
Just so-
Nancy at a restaurant and it was so exciting.
No, that was at the, we met at the Old Ordinary.
Oh, did we?
Whoa.
Yes, and Tavern.
Oh,
One of
yeah.
the
Oh,
best
yeah,
nights
yeah,
in
yeah. I
Hingham.
don't remember Tavern. No, I'm joking. I went home very early.
I'm sorry. What happens at Tavern Night stays at Tavern.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
and
it
just
used
so everyone knows, we also pay for the party. So,
Yes.
so
Well, I
people.
was getting to that, Daveline.
Okay. And I have no money left over from the last party because it went to the gifts for the next year. So.
Well, it used
So,
to be
yeah,
the best party in town. And the incoming chair gets to roast the outgoing chair. So,
And George has so much material to work with from this year. I'm sure of it.
Now. I'll be hard pressed to come up with the roast that was done so well last year by our current chair to our former chair. And then even going beyond that by our former chair to our former chair. So you guys have set the bar very, very high here. So.
Evan's really good at making fun of me, so just call him and he'll give you all the material.
Only the people
So
I like the most.
So yeah, there's a budget involved. There's the catering and the purchase of alcohol and having I think we've had to hire a bartender in recent years and all that. So I do have to dig into the old records and find out, maybe Dave Lean, you know, off the top of your head, what we assessed people on AdCom for the party that we're throwing for the town.
The last time we did it, that when Nancy and Andy and someone who's no longer on the committee and I did it, was $125 per person.
Yeah.
On AdCom. So whatever that budget times, you know, each of us.
Okay.
The prices have gone up substantially since then, as we know, if we look at the school project. And we
Well, except what you do is you just buy the alcohol and the food that fits that budget. So and we had excess of both left over. So
I know, I was gonna say, like, no one needs it. No one needs at parties. But Matt, you had a question?
I'm sorry if I missed it in a prior meeting. I'm sure I'm like just way behind, but the town meeting being April 30th, that goes to the state. But the 24th, 25th date, that's just like off the table. That's not going to happen.
As I understand it, that's correct. That it's supposed to happen on Saturday, April 30th.
Is there, what circumstance would the state like reject that? We would go back to the 25th. There is none, right? Like there's.
Well, I don't think so.
Okay.
Michelle Montecure just tuned in. Oh, there. Hi, Michelle. Do you have anything to say about town meeting date and whether it's pretty sure that we're going to do April 30th, and we don't think that the legislature is going to deny our request to? It's the request is to move the town election. We can move the town meeting date, but the town election has to happen after our town meeting, so you have to petition the legislature. Go ahead, Michelle.
And I don't think, thank you, Julie. I don't think it's a question of them denying it. I don't think that would happen. It's more, will they take this up quick enough for us to make those plans? So we're working with Joan and Pat's offices to make sure that that happens. But for right now, town meeting is still the 25th, but we're hoping that that will come through in time to plan for the 30th.
Thanks.
Can we have everybody just file out of town meeting through the high school and vote on their way out?
That would be really clever, but I don't think that the town clerk would like that.
Or the people who vote but don't come to town meeting. Although maybe.
All right, Tom's here. Let's make this happen.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, everybody.
Michelle. Okay, so our
Sorry it was
outstanding
delayed.
agenda item. Oh, it's okay. You guys had a long meeting tonight. And so we've invited our town administrator to talk about budget priorities. Tom, there's also, it's on our agenda, the pool project that we voted, but there's some desire to discuss with you or chit chat with you about the funding source for the country club, the pool project at the country club. So,
Of course, yep.
do you want to go ahead and start with your presentation, Tom, on the budget priorities?
Sure. Great. Thank you all. This is the same presentation that we provided to the Board of Selectmen probably a week, maybe two ago now. No changes have occurred to this, so just so you know. I'll just walk through these in order. These are all of the municipal side
additional requests, and I've put them in a priority order for you. So starting with number one, the elections, this is an additional poll pad. Carol has identified a need for an additional poll pad. So we are recommending that. That's, you know, the elections are one of the core things we do. So I'm putting that at number one. The fire paramedic school tuition, paramedic school tuition for the fire department. This is because we're having trouble filling vacancies at the fire department. And what we may end up having to do, and nobody really wants to go this route, but what we may end up having to do is hiring EMTs and require that they be trained as paramedics within 6 months of starting the job. And that was what this tuition would allow us to do. So that's the purpose of that. We have to fill these slots. You all see the effects of our fire overtime budget, and this would help with that for sure. So regarding the sustainability coordinator, this would be a person that would report through our office here in the select board office. So this is $48,000 is our share, 2/3 share of a full-time position. I am proposing this as a cost shared position with the town of Cohasset. And I've spoken with the town manager there, Chris Senior, who is in favor of this effort, and he and I would draw up a memorandum of agreement that would tie both towns to this person's salary for the first year. And then we would evaluate and determine whether or not we want to continue in that shared capacity, or if I felt that Hingham had a need for a full-time sustainability coordinator, we would do that. All right. Regarding the part-time office assistant for the Public Works Department, this is the Weir River Water System has been budgeted for a part-time office assistant, and they are proposing, I don't know if you know the way that they're set up over there, but on the second floor of the DPW building, the Weir River Water System Director, Russ Tierney, sits in one office, and on the other side of the common space sits the town engineer. And what we're proposing is to add a full-time office assistant or administrative assistant to work in that office on behalf of those two entities, part-time for the water system and part-time for the town engineer. And we think that that would work well. There are synergies between the two, and they are very proximate to one another. So that is a part-time position, figured 20 hours a week at $26,366. Regarding the part-time grant writer, another position that we're proposing would report up through this office. We're proposing this at 20 hours a week at $40,000, and that will help us. We're hoping that would help us realize more outside money, more non-Hingham taxpayer money, helping us to help us fund our municipal initiatives. That's an item that had in the past been on the town administrator's request list for a number of years. In recent years, it has come off, and I think it's appropriate to get it back on the list. The townwide turf maintenance program has been going very well. You remember that it's managed by the Recreation Department. You remember this was funded last year. This additional request of $27,600 is intended to bring us just outside of the field proper. So right now, all of the fence lines, the benches in large part are overgrown with weeds that make the fields certainly significantly less appealing than they could be, and in some places more difficult to use. So what we're hoping is that with this money, we could get a contractor out there twice a year to clean up the fence lines and benches and backstops and all of the surrounding infrastructure around all of these fields cleaned up twice a year. The assistant town engineer, this is an $85,000 item. It would work under the town engineer who works within the Public Works Department now. When we reframed the entirety of that town engineer office a number of years ago, we had said at the time that we kind of dispersed out a lot of the responsibilities that were under the old structure, and which we have done. And we wanted to evaluate whether or not a single engineer was enough bandwidth for the community. I've evaluated that now over two full years. And I can tell you that I believe that what we need is an assistant engineer to work with the town engineer. I think the capacity is there. They're doing all of the building projects in town. They do all of the road projects. Just in our meeting tonight, there's always, myriad projects that the town engineer gets involved in, including things like, and you'll hear them when they come to your meeting, including things like the reduction of speed limits article that's out there this year. All of these things require engineering assistance, and JR does a great job, but he's one person and he needs support. So that's that item. Regarding the assessing and prioritizing historic markers and monuments through the Historic Preservation Department. You'll remember this is an item that was put into the historical budget a couple of years ago at, I believe it was funded at $2,000. The intent is to assess upwards of, I believe it was 1/5 of the total number of historic markers and monuments that are in the town. The idea being that we would assess and evaluate and then subsequently repair as needed all of the historical markers and monuments in town over a 5-year window, so on a 5-year cycle. And that, as it turns out, that $2,000 line item just is not enough. So we needed more money to make that, to be able to get a consultant to come in and be able to do that work. So this is an additional $3,000 to augment the prior two. Regarding the human resources request, this is expanding quarterly employee training for things like sensitivity training and other more modern workplace training initiatives that I think are expected in the modern day workplace. So this would be a $2,000 item that we're hopeful to be able to use to augment the work that Lisa Campbell is doing in HR. The harbor master has asked for $3,000 to facilitate an improved boat ramp and float system. That's what that is. So from 11 to 14 or 11 to 13 are all very much closely related. So for the fire department, this is 4 additional firefighters. What this really is it's adding 1 firefighter to the minimum manning for the fire department. And because they run on 4 consecutive 4 shifts, we would have to have 4 additional hires. That would come at a cost of $355,000. I am well, I'll go into my prioritization reasoning in a minute. The police department is likewise asking for 1 additional police officer per shift. And this one is, obviously they have 3 shifts over the course of a day, 3 8-hour shifts. And those are, that would require, again, 3 additional officers. That would come at the cost of about $211,000. And then the police overtime set at $40,000. Frankly, that's not enough to make a very big hit. And if we eventually get to the point where we're hiring the additional officers, that will hopefully mitigate the need for an increase in the overtime budget. So I deprioritized that. I've talked that through with the chief, and he understands. The health department's request for 200 flu shots at $9,300 is that can be wiped off. That is, they have found outside funding for that need. So that is no longer a valid need. I just dropped it to the bottom so that you would see that I've taken up each of the additional requests I had submitted. Regarding the prioritization, the reason that I have prioritized it this way and put the additional firefighters and police officers down at the bottom is you heard me at your meeting last week say that I believe we'll be able to balance the budget this year without an override and without the use of fund balance. And I still believe that that's the case. However, it will require cuts to this additional request list, which I would expect. I think that those items should be funded. The town needs them. That's why I'm asking for them. But I think they're more appropriately funded in a year when we're going to be reevaluating our revenue needs, i.e. an override year. So if we're not And I don't believe we should do an override this year. The school department has told us that they're doing their master planning effort or visioning effort over the course of this coming year, and will be better informed next year for what they refer to as right sizing. To the extent that that's going to happen next year, I think that these items are better taken up as part of that conversation. So that's why they're prioritized the way they are. Okay, Julie, any questions, or how do you want to go now?
Well, we could keep the slide up and take any questions from AdCom members. If you have any questions specifically about Brenda.
Yes, hi. Tom, the Climate Action Planning Committee communicated with Patrick O'Connor about funding for the sustainability coordinator position, and they said that they got a commitment from him for some money to be earmarked for that. What has happened with that?
So there may be a commitment from him. That doesn't mean that it's going to be in the budget. So I would say that we need to budget this. I think there's a number of opportunities, Brenda, for funding for that particular item. I'm asking for funding of it because I don't want to risk losing it in case we can't get that outside funding. I think the position is necessary. Chris believes that for Cohasset as well. It's safer to get the budget dollars, and then we can always just not spend them if we're able to get grant or other outside funding. But I agree with you, Pat. Pat has been very supportive, and to the extent we're able to do it that way, that makes sense as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Evening, Tom.
Hi, Bob.
Plaudits to your late night energy. I understand we have a forecast coming up on the horizon. Are these additional requests going to be baked into that forecast?
They already are. So the budgets that are in the forecast are the full additional request budgets for both the town and the school.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Andy?
Thank you, Tom and Julie. I suspect it's too late to go to the CPC for funding of the townwide turf maintenance. But that strikes me as a perfect opportunity for some CPC funds going forward. That's going to be an annual cost, I assume, right, Tom?
Right, that's why we didn't do that, Andy, but you're absolutely right. It does fall within one of their purviews for sure, but where it was an annual cost, we thought it would be better to get into the annual budget.
Okay, and with regard to historic preservation, can the Greenbush Historic Preservation Trust funds be used for that?
So Greenbush is supposed to be intended for use within a certain geographic area. We have historic markers and monuments all around the town that are outside, most of which would be outside of the geographic window of the purview of that account.
And the second trust, they have the Preservation Projects Fund. I don't remember whether there was a balance of 10,500.
Okay, yeah, I can ask Andrea that question.
Okay, thanks.
Do you know if is that fed every year? Is there a source feeding that each year?
Her chart shows the earnings on investments $9,000, gifts and donations $1,500, which is what she lists as a fiscal 23 anticipated revenue. And I just don't recall how much of that she has committed to her expenses, but that I don't know what the corpus of the fund is, but it's not insignificant if it's producing $9,000 a year.
Yep. Okay, I will ask her where it's recurring. It's possible that it would work. So yeah. I'll talk to Andrew.
Thanks, Andy. Bob?
Yeah, I think I have some answers for Andy's questions. I think number one, CPC typically doesn't pay for maintenance. And I don't know that that's a permitted CPC funding vehicle for recreation. So I think it's questionable whether CPC could pay for that. The Preservation Projects Fund is up and down depending on events. I think it has a corpus in excess of $100,000. So it might conceivably serve as a funding source for the monuments, but it isn't anything that is predictably funded on a year-to-year basis. So just trying to provide some answers to those questions.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Nancy?
Thanks, Julie. I had two questions, and the first one I hope doesn't come across as disrespectful, but this is just an honest question on the fire and police, the additional firefighters and officers, which I am 100% for that they are traditionally understaffed and that we have an overtime problem. All of that I understand, but it just seems odd to me that we would have, over almost $600,000 of budget for positions. They're not fully staffed with the positions that they currently have. And it seems like a lot of budget to put aside for additional on top of that positions. So I struggle with that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I hear you, Nancy. I do as well. I talk with the chiefs all the time. If you were fully staffed, would you still be feeling the overtime crunch? And what I'm told is yes, because, well, first of all, the overtime crunch would not be anywhere near as significant if they in fact were fully staffed to the number of positions they have now. So you're absolutely right about that. What I'm told, especially from the fire department, is that there are NFPA standards that, standards, guidelines, et cetera, that suggest our minimum manning is significantly low. At one point, and there are scenarios where we could have one firefighter working the quint, so the ladder truck, and then that's just not safe. It's not in any way recommended.
And I guess my question is, it's a lot of budget to reserve for positions I think realistically aren't going to be filled, simply because we can't fill them.
Well, I think
it feels like we need a
I hear you.
different way to figure that out.
Well, that's what the paramedic tuition is intended to do. We have very few paramedics available. If we were to be able to hire EMTs, the list becomes far, far more significant. And we would be able to fill these positions with EMTs.
Okay.
We're hopeful to not have to do that because, you really want to bring paramedics in, but.
Okay. And then the second question that I have is, it's a less significant number, but the $27,600 for the turf maintenance and the landscaping of the fields and all of that. And I know we went through the study. I'm totally supportive that rec runs that, but when we were looking at the school budgets, there's these set aside funds that have a significant amount of money in them on the school side. And on that line 6, most of what I don't know where the parking lots are, but everything else that seems to be on there is school related. So I'm not suggesting that in perpetuity we would do that, but on a year like now, wouldn't it make sense that we use some of that fund money on the school side for some of that?
It would, and Nancy, I don't disagree. I think that there's another funding source for this. I'm all for it. This is one of those places where it's awkward. I don't have control over those revolving funds or those other funding resources over there. I need the balance. If this can be sussed out, and I'm happy to meet with Gary and John and talk with them about available funds for this purpose. But I don't have control. So what I was trying to do is find funds that will actually help us to get the work done. But I'm more than happy to meet with any of them if you think that that's a reasonable and perhaps likely scenario. Absolutely happy to do that.
You all set, Nancy?
I appreciate it. I know you put a lot of work into this, so thank you.
Nope, no problem.
Daveline?
Yeah, I just had a sort of a follow-up to really, this is a comment to Nancy. So I think one of the problems that the police and particularly fire have had in filling positions is our pay scale was so below that of many other towns. And so I know we did lose firefighters who left here to go to places where they would be.
I think you're right, Dave. It's very telling that the 3 people that they just hired came as firefighters.
Yeah, so I think, all I'm saying is it may be that this new wage and classification and the new collective bargaining agreements may actually make it possible for them to fill positions and have fewer unfilled positions. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I will jump in just real quick and say I completely agree with Daveline, and I think that that's the chief's first and foremost hope. But the EMTs are a backup if that doesn't pan out.
Sure.
Yep.
Oh, I agree with the EMTs completely.
Yep.
Okay, I can't get rid of the news so that I can take down my hand.
Okay.
Some
All
button
right.
came up.
Okay. Sarah?
Yeah, I just, again, to Nancy's comment, but more on the recreation side. And yeah, Tom, maybe you can figure out from Gary and John, now that things are kind of a little more combined under the rec arc of field maintenance, would it be different? But I know a lot of the overgrowth that I've personally, seen and experienced in recent years is more at Carlson, Haley, Hersey, Lynch, Cress, all those fields that are not school property fields, like around benches and dugouts and everything else. And you're sitting in the, team sitting on benches with, grass really long. And so I wonder if we would be able to use school funds at all for a lot of those field needs that are not really located at a school.
Yeah, we'll definitely look into it. Yeah, I think I fear you're right on some of that, but it's absolutely a fair question and one that I will investigate.
Thanks. Additional requests, correct?
Yeah,
Sorry? These are additional requests,
Yes.
not the entire request.
Yes, these are additional requests.
Right. This is like for more the cleanup, right? The weed whacking and around the perimeters and the benches and things. Is that what I understood?
Item 6, that's what this is, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Anyone else have any questions for Tom? All right, well, this is really good to get this list and go through it. Thank you. And if you could spare a little bit more time, Tom and Michelle, I think I'm going to let Bob be the ringleader for this conversation. What do you think, Bob?
Well, Tom, I guess I'll bring up a number of topics. Number one, when I had the privilege to do your job review, I gave you the highest ratings I possibly could, and I still will. So I have the utmost respect
The other shoe.
for what you have to do as the town administrator. And I've seen all the different things you have to handle. And I'll try to make these comments in terms of future process, because I think probably with respect to this year, this ship has sailed. And I'm talking about funding sources for warrant articles. And it's fallen on your broad shoulders to, I guess, come up with those determinations on a year-to-year basis. And we don't always know what they are until fairly late in the process. And I think my first process comment would be, I think it would be useful for the advisory committee and the town administrator's office to have a dialogue about those funding sources before any determinations are finally made by you. I mean, recognizing that the buck stops with you as to what the final determination is, I think it might be useful to have that dialogue, because I think we're principally talking about, are we looking at levy? Are we looking at non-excluded debt? Are we looking at excluded debt? Or are we looking at excess unrestricted fund balance, of which we have a copious amount at this point in time? And I mean, as one of the people who has stood up in public, including at last year's annual town meeting, to say that we saved all this excess fund balance to use to offset the debt impact of the Foster and the public safety facility projects, I am fully aware that it is important that when we say something, that we follow through on it. One of the things that became apparent last year was that the tax impact of a debt exclusion actually is fairly minimal because of the time value of money, as opposed to an override, which impacts taxpayers year to year to year. And I think the town budgeting is a fluid thing that needs to be assessed on an annual basis. And before I get to maybe my last point, I'll say one other thing about forecasting. I know members of this committee have talked a lot about more realistic forecasting. And we've also talked about forecasting of unrestricted fund balance. And I know Andy came up with some excellent comments last week about the historic increase in the amount of fund balance year over year. And I know we've had some extraordinary years where things like the water company funds have come into play. But it does seem to me that before the public safety facility and Foster, which I fully expect to pass because they make complete sense, are finally bonded, that another 5 years is likely to go by, and that it would be useful to consider the likely forecast of fund balance over those 5 years. And believe me, I understand the difficulties and the hypothetical nature of that and all the different things that happen. But of course, we do this with every other line item in town every year. And I do think my AdCom colleagues are tired of hearing me say this, that we might have considered different ultimate funding sources this year for the pool project, namely either excess unrestricted fund balance or a combination of excess unrestricted fund balance and non-excluded debt. That project now remains the only excluded debt project that is likely to be on a ballot. And it is a shovel-ready project that can be completed in a year. I think it could have been funded in perhaps a more creative way without impairing our obligation to use excess unrestricted fund balance That's a tongue twister. I don't know how many times I could say that
Name it.
in one presentation.
Do you want me to tell you how many you've said it? I'm keeping a tally.
And I actually vote. We all voted, and we voted unanimously in favor of the pool project tonight using excluded debt. My vote was with an asterisk that we keep an open mind before town meeting actually happens as to the funding source, and maybe take a second look at it. I mean, we can always revisit that issue, the selectmen can. I just throw those ideas out there for your consideration. And with all respect and admiration for what you do.
Sure. So I can give you some reaction if you'd like.
Sure.
So I appreciate the support for the pool. I think it's an important project for the town. I'm glad that this committee feels that way. And we heard that from the select board as well recently. So that's unanimous support from the select board and advisory. That's going to probably bode well at town meeting. I would also remind everyone that a big part of the reason why unassigned fund balance is as large as it currently is because it was growing over the year. It had always intended to be used to offset the cost of foster. And when foster got deferred for a number of years by the MSBA, the belief was that we should continue to earmark that money for foster. So it stayed, think of it, it stayed in the bank, and it just kept growing and compounding. And for 2 consecutive years that we got postponed or deferred by MSBA. So that money grew because, in large part, because of that. That amount of money, plus the markets were favorable, et cetera. But we, for a number of other reasons, not the least of which is we have good fiscally conservative department heads that only spend what they need to and turn back what they don't. So for all those reasons, I think we end up with a pretty high unassigned fund balance. And what I proposed, and while I hear you, Bob, and at the risk of getting into a mutual admiration society, you know how I feel about you and your leadership of the town. However, I will stand by my recommendation that I believe that mission critical items such as police and fire and a school should realize the benefit of fund balance, which is what it was intended for when we first started saving it. That said, I am again, and I would reiterate, the select board and I'm happy to see that this board is in favor of, as the select board was, funding the pool project.
And what about the process suggestion for the future, Tom?
Sure, happy to look at process always, Bob.
Concerning a dialogue between this committee and the town administrator's office about designation of funding sources for warrant articles.
Yeah, happy to talk about process at any time. I will say that, and I know you know this, Bob, but these are not decisions that are come too lightly, nor quickly, nor easily. They require a lot of experts. We talked with, I mentioned this before at another meeting, we spoke with the Capital Markets Advisor, CMA, Janet Morley, and her team on a regular basis. We talked to people like Rick Manley, John Coughlin get involved at different levels. We have select board input on an individual basis as well as as a board in meetings. So it's a complex process that goes into making these recommendations, and that is one that's difficult to do when you have a large body of, the old too many cooks in the kitchen line comes to mind here. It doesn't mean that there's not value in the input from this committee, but there has to be a point at which we engage 15 individuals for for feedback, and perhaps it should be earlier in the process. I'm absolutely happy to look at that.
Nancy?
I'll be
did you have
quiet.
something?
Well, I'll start out by echoing what Bob said and actually what Tom just said. I mean, I think you know, we all respect Tom for sure, the amount of time and work and effort and the number of the amount of expertise that you bring into the conversations to get to this point. So I don't want for a minute want you to think that at least me am questioning that. And I've stood in front of town meeting when talking about the public safety facility, which I think everybody knows how passionate I am about that. And, you know, that we've earmarked these funds and we know it's coming and please be patient, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel very strongly that we did tell the town that that's what we were going to use those funds for. However, I was, you know, when Andy went down that path last week, it did give me pause of, you know, we are at a point right now where the fund balance is growing at an escalated rate compared to what it has been growing, you know, and I think everybody here with minor exception is old enough to have really known the pain of 2008 and 2009 and would never want to go back into what that was. So I totally get where we came from and how we got to where we are. However, I've seen in two examples this year, in my mind, for me, two examples, one on a micro level and one on a macro level, where the town has, through its boards and committees, has made a decision to forego a relatively small project for some sort of perceived larger financial gain that, in my mind, is a little on the way out. So for instance, on the micro level, on the CPC vote, and I supported, and I'm not here to debate that, but I voted for what the CPC voted for. I will say, though, it was a frustration of mine that they took money away from the redoing the basketball court at Cronin Field and did it to debt service instead. And I'm against debt as much as the average, you know, as much as anybody's against debt. But we are living in a pandemic when people are desperate for outdoor spaces in this town and for community spaces and places that we can gather and be together. And by turning our back on that particular project, that was a huge frustration to me. The gain that we got from paying down debt in no way, to me, equated the value that our citizens would have gotten from the basketball court over the next year. And I think on the macro level, I look at the pool kind of the same way, which is, I do think that we need to be mindful of what we told the town, why we were gathering this money. But Andy's point is well taken, which is, you know, if we're putting $1 million in a fund balance from turnbacks every year, and we're not actually going to go out and bond this money for another 5 years. We got $5 million that we just put back into the fund to do what we said we were going to do with it for the pool. I mean, the public safety facility and for the schools. And so now we've got another public space shovel ready, and we have walked away from another project. And I guess my last thought on that would be is one of my frustrations since I've lived in this town, and I adore this town. I drank the Kool-Aid when we moved here. But one of my frustrations is we seem to only be able to do one thing at a time. And we choose these huge things to do. You know, we're going to build this beautiful new middle school. We're going to buy a water company. we're going to do really complicated, really difficult stuff that everybody has to sit down and really scratch their head over. And all the little stuff that's meaningful to people's lives on a day-to-day basis gets pushed away. And I struggle with that. So I'm not here to tell you that you made the wrong decision, but I'm really questioning sometimes when we are looking at how we're viewing the value of money today for our citizens and these small incremental projects. And in the big picture of $100 million school and probably a $50-60 million public safety facility, a $7 million pool I can swallow. But I'm done. That's my thought on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Tom, do you want to say anything or?
No, I understand the frustration. The only comment I would make, Nancy, is I believe this year we're putting a foster school and a public safety facility on the table. I wouldn't say that's one thing. We got two very big things. But I don't want to sound defensive. I understand the frustration. I hear what you're saying.
And I would say to you, I agree with that, but we didn't mean to do it that way. The MSBA put our back to the wall on that one. So, but I agree.
Daveline?
I'll just say I think it's the third time tonight, and since it's 10:18, I'll be very brief and just say, Tom, some of us actually believe your allocation is absolutely correct. And having heard for a long time that this money is really being set aside for those big projects to lessen the impact of the tax burden on particularly our lower income citizens, that's an important thing to do. And I think that those are more important. The pool, although I support it, I can't quite equate the pool with the public safety building and the school. So they're just not the same. So I just want you to know there are mixed views on this committee. So
thank you, David.
Sarah?
And I really appreciate both perspectives. I personally don't see it as an either or issue. And, I think some of the comments from some of the neighbors said, putting pools before schools. And I think that's unfair in consideration of how we're going to do this, because I really do hear what Bob and Andy are saying in terms of, if we set it aside now, but then money keeps coming back into the fund. I mean, we're currently at 30%. Are we going to then get to 35% by the time we're actually using this money? I don't think that that's where a lot of people want the direction that a lot of people want us to go. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I will say, Sarah, that the plan that I put forward for use of fund balance is using 10.1 of the $12 million that is designated as excess fund balance this year.
Oh, right, but setting aside, was it 7 for the?
It's reserving it, yeah.
Reserving, right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
For the future use against the school in hot.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. But it would no longer count towards unassigned fund balance.
There.
But it's money that just is going to sit there.
It's going to sit there to be used for the school purposes. Yes.
But as Bob's point was that, the time value of money, when you're talking about debt exclusions and these large borrowings, means that relatively small funds that can have immediate impacts perhaps should be given a higher priority.
Okay.
Can I just step in a little?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Now you did it, Andy.
Somebody,
I mean,
The
we've just gone beyond the beyond.
The one thing you have to understand also is where interest rates are now starting to climb at an incredible rate, we might not be going band. it might be just better to go bonds, because if the bands go up, if interest rates keep going up, you might want to secure it now and not later. And then we would use fund balance a lot earlier than everybody is saying 5 years from now. Just food for thought.
I'll take Matt Goulet's advice on that, and he would probably say, go into the market tomorrow. But I'll let him speak for himself.
I would.
Get as much as you can right now.
Feels that way. What do I know though?
All right, well, does anyone have anything else to add, or are we satisfied we've said what we want to say? All right.
I'm not sure, Bob, that your introduction had the desired effect. You might want to restate that to Tom.
He'd already done the review, Andy. It's not pending.
I will say, given that challenge, that, Tom's reactions to all kinds of thoughts and ideas at town committee meetings, the select board, are always right on the money. I mean, he listens. I think he adapts. He makes decisions, and they're good decisions. And so I'll end where I started. I know a guy who's a good town administrator, and it's Tom Mayo. That's kind of a private joke.
It's good. It's good to know a guy. Yeah.
Apparently, I got to stop using that term.
Tom happens to know a lot of guys that do a lot of good things for the town of Hingham.
All right. Well, Tom and Michelle, thank you for joining us tonight and listening and helping us on our way. So
anytime, like I said, I expect to be summoned many times. So anytime you call, I will be here. Sorry, I was late.
Next time, our group.
I think Michelle is thinking, God, it's a good thing it's a Zoom meeting. I don't think these people can find their way home.
Well, so the next time we get to speak with you, Tom and Michelle, as a group, is our joint meeting to hear the forecast on March 1st, correct? So
yes,
we will discuss the latest and greatest then. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
Have a good night.
Thank you. AdCom, I just have one more thing to say, and then I'll be done. But I wanted to tell you that we've seen the list of budget priorities from the town administrator. And at this time every year, what we would ask the liaisons, any liaison who worked on a budget that had an additional request that was listed tonight, please review your notes on this request, including the department head's reasons for the additional request. Because in a couple of weeks, when AdCom goes through the final budget reconciliation and we figure out if we can add anything in, or what our options are, it's good to know, to have the story on why this Tom explained it tonight, but just if you can refamiliarize yourself with this information, it will come in handy when we have our final budget meeting. So that is all I have. Are there any matters not anticipated within 48 hours of the meeting? All right, then can I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
Bob?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Evan?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Daveline?
Aye.
Brenda?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
I don't see Al. Tina?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Caitlin?
Aye.
Sarah?
Hi.
Thank you all. Enjoy the week off. Have fun.